Hey guys, tonight we are crawling into bed with royalty, but not in the way you think. You're about to find out exactly how kings and queens slept in the dead of medieval winter, and spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't have made it through the night. These were people wrapped in velvet and privilege, and still went to bed freezing, itchy, and sometimes surrounded by servants whispering in the shadows. If you've ever complained about your apartment's heating not working, well, get ready to clutch your modern duvet a little tighter. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. It's a bitter January night in 1347. You're in a grand chamber inside a massive stone castle. Cold, damp, and echoing with the occasional creak of settling wood beams. Outside, snow is falling in hushed waves over the hills, collecting on arrow slits and stone parapets. Inside, you're standing in the so-called bedchamber of a king, a room as regal as it is glacial. There's a fire burning in the hearth, but it might as well be a candle for all the warmth it gives. Your breath clouds in the air as you exhale. The floor under your boots is icy despite the rushes that servants have scattered over it to soak up spills and less pleasant things. Your eyes land on the royal bed, tall, imposing and draped with heavy velvet curtains. The canopy above it, intricately carved, is meant to be as much insulation as ornament. It looks warm, cosy even, but don't be fooled, that bed is a battlefield. It's you versus the cold, the lice, and sometimes even the politics. You walk closer and notice the sheer amount of effort that went into making this place feel livable in winter. Tapestries hang thick on every wall, scenes of knights, saints and epic hunts, less for aesthetic value and more as an attempt to trap heat. The windows, tiny and shuttered tight with glass so wavy it barely lets in light and certainly doesn't keep out the cold. Most likely thick wooden shutters are slammed against the inside too, just to stop the drafts. Still, if the wind howls the right way, you'll feel it snake across the room like a ghost looking for toes to nibble. The air smells faintly of damp stone bark and something animal. Maybe it's the furs on the bed, or maybe it's the warm-bodied hound lying curled near the coals. Even kings needed pets for more than companionship. They were space heaters with legs. A servant walks by, barely a whisper of footsteps on the floor, and begins pouring hot coals into a long-handled bed warmer. It's like a medieval curling iron for the sheets, warmed metal that gets passed between the layers of linen to chase away the cold. But it's a race against time. By the time the king gets in bed, half that warmth will be gone. There's no central heating here, obviously. No radiators humming in the background. In fact, the idea of heating the house wouldn't show up for centuries. Castles were built to protect, not pamper. The thick stone walls that kept out arrows also locked in cold. At best, the goal was to heat people, not rooms. You heated yourself with furs, with layers, wars, and with whatever, or whoever, was willing to sleep beside you. And that brings us to the reality check. You're not sleeping alone, even if you're the king. In fact, especially if you're the king. Royalty didn't just live surrounded by people, they slept surrounded by them too. Chamberlain local, and bodyguards often lingered just out of sight. Some monarchs even kept their advisors close at night, just in case a late-night decision had to be made. So you're standing there imagining your royal self climbing into bed. Before you even touch the sheets, servants are layering on featherbeds, woolen covers, quilts stuffed with swan's down, and furs from creatures you'd rather not think about. Think bear, fox, maybe even wolf. It takes several layers just to feel remotely cozy. But underneath it all, a straw mattress on a wooden frame, and straw shifts. It creaks, it moulds, it makes noises when you move. There's a soft clink as the fire gets poked again, and the shadows dance wildly, the walls seem to move with them. You start to notice that even here, in this most luxurious of rooms, there's no escaping the medieval chill. There's no fleece onesie to slip into. Instead, you're wearing a wool nightshirt, maybe a doublet, some socks, and a nightcap that makes you look like a very tired wizard. Here's your quirky fact for the night. Some royals even wore nose warmers. Yes, actual cloth wraps or knitted sleeves that looped around the ears and covered the nose, so it wouldn't freeze while you slept below course, because it absolutely could. Your nose was the first thing to go numb, followed by your fingers, then your soul. Probably. And now for a little debate. Historians still argue about just how cold these rooms got. Some records suggest you could literally see frost forming inside on certain mornings, while others think the presence of people, animals and fire would have warmed things up more than we assume. Still, most agree that royal bedrooms were better than peasant huts, but only in the sense that you might survive till dawn without frostbite. So as you pull back those heavy curtains, climb into your fortress of bedding and pray the fire doesn't die before dawn, you're not just sleeping, you're enduring. And when you wake up, you better hope your squire already lit the fire again, because nothing's worse than peeling yourself out of bed into medieval morning air. You shift under the covers and instantly realise something. The bed may be grand, the furs may be thick, but the air still bites. And as your medieval royal eyes blink open in the pre-dawn gloom, you start to remember, this castle you live in is basically a fortified freezer. Stone walls rise around you, impressive and unyielding, stretching nearly 2 feet thick in places. These weren't built for comfort. They were designed to stop battering rams and keep out angry mobs with torches. Unfortunately, they also trap every ounce of cold from the night before, releasing it slowly, like a passive-aggressive glacier. The castle is a marvel of military engineering and a complete failure of home insulation. Your chamber, even as a royal, is placed on an upper floor, partly to keep you safe from sieges and partly to elevate you above the rank and file. That means you're even closer to the biting drafts that snake down from the rafters. The ceilings are absurdly high, which looks regal, but is an absolute curse for heating. Any warmth that does exist floats up into the void, leaving you and your royal toes shivering below. Your breath fogs as you sit up. You touch the stone wall beside your bed and instantly recoil. It's like touching the belly of a snow beast. Even your grand fireplace, now reduced to glowing embers, was never enough to heat the whole room. At best, it offered a psychological illusion of comfort. Flames flicker, must be warm. Wrong. This is a key truth of medieval castle life. Fire was visual reassurance, not reliable heat. Fireplaces were shallow, more for smoke control than radiant heat. There were no metal inserts or cleverly engineered chimneys to maximise warmth. The drafty flues sucked the hot air upward and away like they were doing it out of spite. And even lighting the fire had its challenges. Wood had to be hauled in, seasoned, chopped, and often damp from the cold air. A servant would have risen earlier than you, creeping into your chamber before dawn to coax the fire back to life. If they were late or lazy, well, good luck to them. Your royalty. That fire was your divine right. Even with flames flickering again, the room remains bone cold. You glance toward the tall, narrow windows. Arrow slits widen just enough to let in a sliver of grey morning light. There's no real glass here. If you're lucky, maybe a horn pane or oiled parchment has been stretched across the opening. It lets in light, but not much else. Wind still finds its way in, whispering around the edges, cutting across your skin like a paper-thin dagger. And don't even start with the floors. Stone laid over stone, sometimes with planks or woven rush mats to soften the blow to your feet. But warmth? No chance. In winter, the floors are so cold they seem to hum with misery. You remember this every time your feet hit them, and you vow yet again to never leave the bed until someone brings you hot wine. Let's zoom out for a second. Here's your historical fact for this section. Most castles, especially earlier medieval ones, had zero insulation. The concept simply didn't exist in the way we understand it. There was no stuffing between walls, no clever architectural tricks to seal in heat. In fact, many castles had large gaps between floors and walls where smoke and wind passed freely. Fireplaces became more common in the 11th and 12th centuries, but they were rudimentary and rarely efficient. The massive central hearths you see in movies? Mostly romanticised. Real castle fires were smaller, fussier, and left cold corners in every direction. You lean back against the wall again. Dan, why do you keep doing that? And start to consider the daily pattern. Heat would only arrive in pulses. During meals in the Great Hall, where crowds of people, dogs and torches generated a shared warmth. During baths, which were rare, and done quickly before the water lost its meagre steam. And at bedtime when you disappear under a pile of blankets so heavy they might qualify as medieval weight training. Here's a quirky tidbit to warm your brain if nothing else. Some castles used heated stones wrapped in cloth and tucked into bedding before the royal bum hit the mattress. Basically, a DIY bed heater. If that sounds a lot like a primitive hot water bottle, bingo. Except this one was a literal rock from the fire pit. Cosy. Until it scorched a hole through the sheets. Now for a scholarly shrug of a debate. Were medieval castles ever actually warm? Some argue yes, briefly in well-occupied spaces with multiple fires burning during feasts or when sunlight managed to hit the stone just right. Others say no, that warmth was always temporary and highly localised. Some believe upper-class areas were more comfortable, with better fireplaces and thicker wall hangings, while others suggest all rooms, from the king's solar to the guards' quarters, were united in their frigid suffering. There's no conclusive answer, just a lot of frostbitten guesswork. So now you're pacing your chamber wrapped in a fur-trimmed robe, maybe a little cranky because someone forgot to heat your slippers. You walk past a tapestry depicting your ancestors slaying dragons or something equally heroic, and you realise it's not just decor, it's insulation. Tapestries were the medieval answer to drywall. You might have layers of them, swapped seasonally to cover more of the wall space and block the brutal drafts that love to dance along the seams. You eye the door now. Heavy oak reinforced with iron bands, it creaks like an old man getting out of bed. Even when it's closed, the gaps around it whistle softly. The chill seeps under and around it, like cold smoke with nowhere better to go. So you pull your robes tighter, step over the snoring dog who somehow found the warmest spot near the hearth, and realise something both tragic and hilarious. This, for the time, is luxury. This is the height of royal winter living. You are a crowned sovereign of vast lands. Armies bend to your will, but the floor still freezes your toes, and a sneeze echoes like a cannon through your icy chamber. Sleep, as you're beginning to understand, was not just a nightly routine. It was a ritual of endurance. Getting through the night meant surviving stone smoke and shivering silence. And dawn, while beautiful, only meant you had to do it all again the next night. You're standing next to that massive royal bed again, still shivering despite all the furs you've piled on your shoulders, but now your eyes are drawn upward to the structure of the bed itself. This isn't just a place to lie down, it's a fortress within a fortress. The medieval canopy bed, towering with carved oak and velvet draperie, this is the crown jewel of winter survival. Without it, even a king wouldn't last till morning. Let's break it down. This thing is big, monumentally big. A royal bed in the 13th or 14th century could easily be the size of a modern-day SUV. Thick wooden posts rise at each corner, holding up a canopy that isn't just decorative. It's the first line of defence against the cold. Above you is a solid wooden roof or a heavy cloth top, meant to trap any semblance of rising warmth from your body, your dog, and maybe even your unfortunate bed servant. You're not just sleeping under the covers, you're sleeping inside the bed. Once those thick curtains are drawn shut, you're sealed in your own private cocoon, insulated as best as medieval tech allowed. You crawl in, ducking slightly so your nightcap doesn't fall off, and pull the velvet curtains closed. Outside them, the room might still feel like the inside of a mausoleum, but inside, it's almost bearable. Your body hard, layered bedding, and whatever animal companions you've allowed under the covers all contribute to a slowly warming pocket of air. Is it warm? No, but it's not death either. Now here's your historical fact. The canopy bed wasn't invented as a luxury statement. It was a survival tool. In fact, many nobles didn't even own them until the late medieval period. Before that, beds were simpler and colder. But once these enclosed beds became popular in the 13th century, they spread quickly among the elite. The canopy and curtains weren't about showing off. They were about blocking wind, trapping heat, and keeping the rats from dropping in on your face at 2 a.m. From the rafters above, you reach up and touch the canopy's wooden underside. Cold, yes, but solid. The thick drapes surrounding you are made of wool lined with fur or layered with tapestry fabric so tightly woven it could double as a shield. They're not the breezy, fluttery kind of curtains you'd find in some Renaissance painting. They're dense, stiff, and heavy enough that it takes real effort to pull them aside. The only thing that moves them at night is you, or possibly the ghost of an ancestor checking in on how pathetically soft you've become. Let's not forget, in many royal households, especially earlier in the Middle Ages, the bed wasn't always a private space. Your canopy bed was sometimes the only part of the room that gave you any illusion of solitude. The drapes weren't just blocking out cold, they were blocking out people. Your chamber might have a dozen souls sleeping, working, or guarding nearby. Your bed? It's a fabric-walled kingdom within your kingdom. Now, here's your quirky fact. In some royal beds, small peepholes were left in the curtains, so that servants could check whether the king or queen was awake, without disturbing them. Imagine being so revered, yet so watched, that someone designed your sleeping arrangements like a surveillance operation. Sweet dreams, Your Majesty. You wiggle further down into the bedding. Let's talk layers. At the bottom is a straw or feather mattress, resting on wooden slats or rope webbing. Then comes the underblanket, usually coarse wool, good for absorbing any unfortunate nighttime sweating or worse. On top of that, feather bears, woolen quilts and fur throws. There might be 5, 6, even 7 layers, depending on how close you are to the Alps and how paranoid you are about freezing in your sleep. Some monarchs reportedly slept under so many layers that they needed help turning over. Movement wasn't expected. You basically got in, cocooned yourself, and didn't move until morning, or until a political assassination attempt woke you up. Here's where the debate comes in. Historians still argue about the actual effectiveness of these canopy beds. Some say the enclosed curtains created genuine microclimates, raising the temperature several degrees inside the bed. Others think that unless you had a small army of servants constantly reheating bricks or managing airflow, the curtains mostly trapped smells and dampness. Essentially, you were trading cold air for warm funk. Romantic, right? As you settle in, adjusting the furs over your shoulders, you start to notice just how quiet it is inside this curtained fortress. Outside, the castle groans in the wind. You hear the creak of wood beams, the distant bark of a dog in the courtyard, maybe even the whistle of snow flurries gusting through an unseen crack in the stone. But inside this velvet-wrapped sanctuary, it's muffled. Not peaceful exactly, but private. Safe in the way that heavy blankets always seem to be, no matter what century you're in. You press your face into the pillows, stuffed with feathers and perhaps even scented with dried herbs like lavender or mint, if your chambermaid had time that day. Scents weren't just for comfort, they were meant to ward off illness. Because remember, people believed disease travelled through bad air. Blocking that air with sweet-smelling sachets was considered preventative medicine. No germs here, just rose petals and crushed sage. And for a final moment before sleep, you find yourself doing something very medieval. Listening. In an era without light switches, smartphones or clocks ticking on the wall, the night had a rhythm of its own. You tuned into the house, the shuffle of guards, the crackle of dying fire, the occasional cough echoing from a distant corridor. Even kings slept lightly. Enemies didn't knock. You close your eyes and pull the curtain tighter. You may be the most powerful person in the kingdom, but when the cold sets in, and the fire dies down and the tapestries sag with frost, it's just you, your bed, and the long dark wait for sunrise. So you're finally asleep, or so you think. But then your eyes crack open. Not from a nightmare, not from someone rattling a sword outside your chamber, but from absolutely nothing. No sound, no disturbance, just a strange wide-eyed alertness in the middle of the night. Welcome to the mysterious world of segmented sleep, where waking up for a few hours between 2 chunks of rest wasn't just normal, it was expected. You lie there in your little curtained bed cave, blinking into the darkness. The fire having long since given up the fight. It's probably around midnight, maybe a little later. The bed is still warm from your own body heat, but the air inside the canopy has gone cool again, thin with breath and silence. There's a part of you that wants to panic. Insomnia in a time before melatonin gummies feels like a curse. But here's the twist. This is just how people slept back then. In the medieval world, most people didn't sleep through the night to it, one long, blissful stretch. Instead, they followed what's now called a biphasic or segmented sleep pattern. They'd go to bed shortly after sunset, especially in winter when darkness swallowed the land early, and sleep for about 4 hours. Then, like clockwork, they'd wake up around midnight. Not fully refreshed, but not groggy either. Just awake. That middle-of-the-night window, often called the watch, could last for 1 or 2 hours. And here's where things get weirdly cozy. You weren't expected to do anything productive. No emails, no chores. You just existed in the soft middle space between sleep 1 and sleep 2. Historical fact time. There's documentation of this first sleep and second sleep rhythm from across medieval Europe. Monks wrote about it in their records, doctors referenced it in their medical texts, and poets even wove it into their verses. One old medical guide even advised married couples that this quiet in-between period was the best time for, well, marital closeness. Nothing like romance by candlelight with your nose warmer on. But what would a king or queen actually do during this pause between dreams? Sometimes they'd pray. Devotionals kept at the bedside weren't uncommon. The pious might kneel at a small altar in their chamber, wrapped in layers, whispering psalms into the darkness. Others might reflect, journal if they were literate and inclined, or simply lie awake staring at the ceiling, contemplating kingdom-level problems like which cousin might stab them next. And let's not forget the royal astrologers and dream interpreters. If a monarch had a particularly vivid dream during first sleep, it was often considered significant. They might summon a trusted servant or scholar in the dead of night to explain what it meant. Did the white stag in your dream mean victory in war, or an assassination plot? That kind of stuff mattered deeply when your crown depended on good omens. Quirky fact incoming: some people use this middle of the night intermission to sneak out of bed and check on their food. No joke. There are accounts of nobles inspecting their ale to make sure it hadn't frozen solid or grown a disturbing skin of ice. Because remember, no kitchens upstairs and no guarantee that the wine jug left by your bedside hadn't turned into a medieval popsicle. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about why segmented sleep was so widespread. Was it just a response to longer winter nights? Did the lack of artificial light naturally split sleep cycles in two, or was it a deeper biological rhythm that we've since trained ourselves out of with modern lighting and Netflix? The answer's not entirely clear. What is clear, though, is that waking up in the middle of the night didn't mean your sleep was broken. It meant it was working, just on medieval time. Back in your bed, the silence is deeper now. You hear the occasional pop from the hearth, just embers breaking apart in the ash, and the snore of the loyal hound curled beside the bedpost. No servants move, the castle is resting, so you roll onto your back, blink at the canopy's carved underside, and begin to let your mind drift. Maybe you think about hunting tomorrow. Maybe you're replaying court intrigue. Maybe you're just wondering if your ancestors ever froze to death mid-dream. Then, because you're a medieval royal and you're never truly alone, a quiet knock against wood. A servant softly setting a warmed drink on the side table. You don't even see them. They come and go like ghosts, trained to be invisible. But now there's a small clay cup of heated wine or ale spiced with cloves. You sip it slowly, the warmth travelling down your throat like a promise that second sleep will be better. You lie back again. Slowly, without realising, your eyes begin to shut. Your thoughts unravel into softness. The canopy curtains sway just slightly with a draught you no longer care about. The dog stirs, sighs and settles. The silence deepens, and the second sleep takes you like a tide rolling back over the beach. There's something incredibly human about this rhythm. No alarms, no rush, no guilt about being awake in the night. Just time and space and layers of blankets. It's not insomnia, it's intermission. And when you finally wake again hours later, the room will still be cold, the fire out, and your royal toes half frozen. But you'll have made it through another long winter night, the medieval way. You're awake again, this time for real, and it's morning, or at least the closest thing to morning that exists in a medieval castle in winter. The light filtering through the cracks in the shutters is a dull grey, like someone tried to colour in the sky with old ash. But before you even think about crawling out from your mountain of bedding, there's something pressing on your mind. Literally, the weight of everything you're wearing. Because in a medieval royal bedroom, your pyjamas are less cosy flannel and more layered survival gear. So let's talk about what you, a king or queen, actually wear to bed. Spoiler, it's a lot. The idea of slipping into something more comfortable didn't really apply unless your idea of comfort includes wool, linen, and at least 2 belts. Your sleepwear wasn't designed for style or even relaxation. It was designed to keep your limbs from freezing off before dawn. First, you've got your base layer, a linen shift or chemise. For men, that's a long shirt that falls to the knees or lower. For women, a similar garment, often ankle length. Linen was the medieval version of breathable cotton, only a bit scratchier, and occasionally full of surprise insects. But it was clean, relatively soft, and the only thing touching your skin directly. That shift alone, however, was as effective against the castle's chill as wearing a tissue during a snowstorm. So over the shift comes the second layer, a woolen nightgown or robe. This isn't your plush hotel robe with the embroidered crest. No, this is coarse, heavy wool, scratchy, hot, and occasionally smelling faintly of sheep, no matter how many lavender sachets your servants hang in the wardrobe. If you're especially royal and especially freezing, you might double up. 2 shifts, a robe, and maybe even a quilted doublet. That's right, a lightly padded jacket just for sleeping. Because fashion never sleeps, even when you're sleeping in 4 layers. Now here comes the historical fact for today. Many monarchs, especially in the later Middle Ages, wore hosen to bed. These were tight-fitting leg coverings. Think of them as a mix between tights and pants that tied to a belt around the waist, because heaven forbid your thighs experience or so more. In cold climates, even feet didn't go free. You'd slip on wool socks and maybe even stuff them with cloth for extra insulation. And if things were really dire, wrap your feet in fur. And yes, we have to talk about the nightcap. This wasn't just a fashion statement. It was an essential part of the medieval sleep kit. The head loses heat faster than other parts of the body, ask any bald guy, and in a stone chamber with a ceiling high enough to echo your own thoughts, warmth escapes fast. A proper royal nightcap could be made of linen or wool, sometimes lined with fur or edged in embroidery for a touch of flair. But don't let the cutesy look fool you. It was doing serious work. Quirky fact time, there are records of royals using face cloths or even partial veils at night. Not for modesty, but for warmth. Some were tied around the lower face like a scarf you'd wear to rob a 14th century bank. In particularly brutal winters, they'd even wrap the tip of the nose, because once that freezes, it's all downhill from there. So if you've ever felt silly wearing a sleep mask, just remember your royal ancestors went to bed looking like medieval bandits. Now let's get into the debate that keeps a few dedicated historians up at night. How many of these layers were for actual sleeping? And how many were just for undressing in private before bed? Some argue that the full stack of garments, robe, hosen, doublet, were for pre-bed warmth and quickly stripped off once the royal body hit the mattress. Others believe people just slept in everything and layered down like they were climbing Mount Everest in their dreams. There's no consensus, just a lot of educated guesses and some awkward illustrations of kings bundled like burritos. You try to move now, and that's when it hits you. Sleeping in layers sounds smart until you try turning over. The friction between wool and linen is real. You're stuck. You shift slightly, only for the blanket to follow in a clump. The nightcap has rotated 45 degrees on your head. One sock is halfway off. This is not graceful, but you didn't freeze to death in the night, so hey, victory. There's also the matter of cleanliness, or lack thereof. These sleep garments weren't washed nightly. That linen shift you love so much, it might go several wears before being laundered, if it was laundered at all. And let's not even start on the wool robe. In winter, when water froze in basins and hot baths were an ordeal, cleanliness took a back seat to not dying of exposure. You might sleep warm, but you'd wake up smelling like something between a hayloft and a medieval soup kitchen. But of course, you're royalty. You don't dress yourself. Before dawn, a chamberlain or lady-in-waiting is already hovering, ready to help you peel off your overnight armour. If you're particularly fortunate, they've been warming your day clothes by the fire. But until then, you're still wrapped like a sausage in linen and wool, blinking in the pale light, and wondering yet again how it's possible to have this much power and still feel like a chilled medieval burrito. And yet, there's a strange charm in the ritual, the layers, the slow undressing, the whispered chatter from servants as they bustle about. It's all part of the rhythm of royal life. You aren't just waking up, you're being reassembled, piece by piece, from sleep-shifted monarch to daylight ruler. And if your sleeves get stuck or your hose sag a little, well, that's what attendants are for. You finally sit upright, furs falling into a pile at your side, and reach for the goblet of morning wine, or maybe spiced ale, slightly less frozen than it was in the night. Your toes touch the cold floor and you shudder. You're not dressed for the day yet, but at least you survived the night. Let's talk about the fireplace, or as you might come to call it after a few days in this stone-clad ice palace, the Grand Illusion. You look over at it now, that elegant hearth nestled into the far wall of your royal chamber. It's framed with ornate stonework, maybe even carved with lions, ivy, or your favourite family crest. It looks impressive, it feels symbolic, and it's also, to put it plainly, doing almost nothing to heat the room. There's still a faint red glow in the ashes. A few struggling embers, the survivors of the pre-dawn fire, flicker like dying stars. A servant will be in shortly to rekindle it, but you already know that within an hour, it'll be just as cold in this room as it was before. Medieval fireplaces were, shall we say, optimistic inventions, great for cooking, decent for light, but for warming an entire room the size of a small cathedral, that's a hard no. Let's unpack that. The basic design of a medieval fireplace was pretty simple. A shallow firebox built into the wall, a large hood or arch above to catch smoke, and a narrow flue to vent it upward. It sounds fine in theory, but the reality, the fire was shallow and small, the smoke often blew right back into the room, and most of the heat went zooming up the chimney like it had better places to be. You'd think a stone room would hold heat. Wrong, the stone just soaked it up like a sponge and stayed icy. Your fireplace was a placebo with a pretty glow. Here's a useful historical fact. Chimneys weren't even standard in all castles until the later Middle Ages. Before that, fires were lit in the middle of the floor, with smoke escaping through vents in the ceiling or open windows, if it escaped at all. Your royal ancestors probably slept in smoke-stained chambers where the ceiling beams were blackened, and their lungs were constantly reminded of last night's firewood quality. So if you're enjoying your semi-functional hearth now, you're basically living the high life. You swing your legs out of bed and tiptoe across the floor. Every footstep sends a cold jolt up your spine. You try to stand near the fire for a little comfort, but even that's disappointing. The heat barely radiates more than a couple feet. If you back up too far, let's say the other side of your enormous chamber, you might as well be standing in a damp forest. In January. Now here comes a quirky little fact to toast your freezing fingertips. Some royal households employed a firekeeper, a servant whose whole job was to make sure your fire didn't die during the night. But the logistics of that were tricky. Imagine a half-tear sleep page boy creeping into your room at 3 a.m, stirring the coals, adding logs, possibly tripping over the dog and trying not to wake the crown-wearing lump under the canopy. Unsurprisingly, a lot of nobles just let the fire burn down and hoped for the best. Some royal chambers did try to get clever. They'd build double fireplaces, one on each side of a shared wall, heating 2 rooms at once. Or they'd create small side flues to direct heat along the stone. Nice idea, but again, most of the warmth still got sucked upward. You know what did work though? Crowd proximity. A room full of bodies made things warmer, fast, which explains why nobles often hosted meetings, prayers, and even breakfast in their bedchambers, not for convenience, for body heat. This brings us to the hot debate among castle historians. Were medieval fireplaces a genuine source of warmth, or mostly for show? Some argue they were perfectly adequate for their time, especially in smaller chambers with low ceilings. Others think they were more status symbol than solution, an excuse to display wealth and taste, even if everyone was still freezing. After all, nothing says I am a divine ruler, like sitting in front of a roaring fire that barely warms your knees. You look up and notice the flue, a narrow stone throat that runs up the wall and out the tower. Sometimes birds nested in them, sometimes snow blew down into them, sometimes smoke came right back in and set off a hacking fit that echoed through the hall. Chimneys were not foolproof, and when they clogged or cracked, congratulations! You just turned your royal suite into a giant, breathable barbecue pit. Oh, and forget about fire safety. You're lying in bed wearing several layers of flammable fabric surrounded by wool, fur, and wooden furniture, all in the proximity of an open flame. Castle fires were a thing, a terrifying, sleep-killing, life-ending thing. That's why your servants are trained to bank the fire carefully before dawn, stacking the logs in a slow-burning arrangement that won't suddenly flare up and torch your lineage. Now, if you were really fancy, and we're talking later medieval fancy, you might have had a small iron stove tucked inside the fireplace. This would contain the fire better, push out more heat and reduce smoke, but most kings and queens didn't have that luxury until the Renaissance rolled in, dragging innovation with it. Until then, it was just you, your sad little pile of logs and hope. You step back from the hearth, rubbing your hands together. They're red with cold, the kind of cold that lingers in your joints and makes every movement just a little harder. Your face feels tight, like the skin has shrunk half a size overnight. And even your breath fogs in the air, curling upward like a morning ghost. Still the fire burns, you stare at it. You kind of need to. Because even if it doesn't heat the whole room, it tricks your brain. It says, this is fine, you're not freezing, you're royal, look at the fire. And so you do. Then you wrap yourself tighter in your robe, retreat back to your bed's warm shell, and let the embers crackle away behind you. Silent, beautiful, and mostly useless. You've been staring at the fire for a while now, possibly out of hope, possibly because your toes are on the verge of mutiny, and then it hits you. It's time for reinforcements. This isn't your first frigid winter in a castle, and it sure won't be your last. You know what comes next, the true saviours of medieval sleep, the unsung heroes of noble bedtime. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present the Royal Hot Water Bottle's extended family, brick warmers, bedpans, and other borderline medieval sorcery. First up is the bed warmer. No, not a heated blanket, sorry. This is a long-handled shallow metal pan, usually made of brass or copper, filled with glowing embers from the hearth. Sounds dangerous? That's because it was. A servant, usually shivering themselves, would place the coals inside the pan, shut the perforated lid, and slide it between the bed linens before your royal behind got anywhere near them. A few slow passes under the sheets, maybe even flipping the mattress if you were high maintenance. And voila, instant, fleeting warmth. Very fleeting. You know how warm a cookie sheet is 5 minutes after you take it out of the oven? That's about how long your bed stays toasty. By the time the servant leaves the room, the heat is already fading, but still you'd notice. That first touch of warmth beneath your covers is pure medieval luxury. You might even sigh dramatically, just to remind everyone how hard your life is. Next in the royal arsenal, heated stones. These are more rustic. Picture a thick, flat stone warmed in the fire until it's nearly too hot to handle. Then it's wrapped in layers of cloth, linen, wool, maybe even fur, and slipped between your sheets or placed at the foot of the bed like a little medieval space heater. Bonus, these stones held heat better than embers and didn't threaten to burn your castle down. Downside, you could still burn yourself if someone skipped a layer in the wrapping. Also, they smell like rocks, which is, surprisingly, a smell. Let's not forget the OG hot water bottle. Animal skin or ceramic vessels filled with boiling water. Leather bags made from goat or pig bladders, yes, bladders, were used for this purpose, because why waste a good organ? Tied off and stitched, these primitive water bottles were slipped under the covers where they slowly radiated heat. Ceramic or metal versions, when available, were fancier and a bit safer, until one cracked and dumped scalding water into your straw mattress. Still, if you've ever hugged a hot water bottle on a cold night, you know exactly why they bothered. Historical fact alert. Queen Elizabeth I reportedly had her bed warmed, with bricks heated in the coals wrapped in cloth. It wasn't elegant, but it worked, and it tells you everything you need to know about castle heating systems, namely that royalty used the same hacks peasants did, just with nicer wrapping. A king and his chamber boy might have shared the same warmed stone solution, even if one of them got lavender-scented linen and the other used a sack. And now, for your quirky fact of the night, there were even heated footstools filled with coals, designed specifically to be slid under the bed linens at your feet. You'd fall asleep with your soles blissfully roasting until the coals went out or scorched a hole through their blanket. These warmers often had decorative metalwork, so even your most practical tools were still trying to impress guests. Nothing says royal flair like foot blisters from an engraved lion-shaped heater. Of course, this is where our scholarly debate enters the room. Some historians argue these methods were widespread and relatively effective, helping make the worst night survivable, even comfortable. Others are more cynical, suggesting these warmers were a luxury reserved for monarchs and the highest nobles, while everyone else just shivered and prayed. There's also debate over whether servants ever used the warmers for themselves before bringing them to the bed. Cheeky little rebellion, perhaps. If you were hauling rocks through snow to warm someone else's feet, wouldn't you steal a few seconds of heat? Back to you in your royal pyjamas. You're watching now as your chambermaid, eyes droopy from waking before dawn, kneels beside the fire, heating a stone until it glows faintly red. She wraps it carefully, slips it into a fur-lined pouch, and walks it over like she's carrying treasure. And in a way she is. You lift the covers, she places the warm bundle near your feet, and the sensation is glorious, like sinking into a bath that only exists from the ankles down. It doesn't last, of course. Within half an hour, the heat fades into memory, leaving a barely detectable pocket of warmth like a ghost's embrace. But for a little while, you feel human again. The cold recedes just enough that you stop thinking about your nose falling off. You might even fall back asleep for a few minutes. And that, during a 14th century January night in a wind-battered stone tower, is a miracle. What makes this even more absurd is that each of these devices came with its own risks. Bed warmers could catch the mattress on fire. Heated stones could crack, leak, or roll onto bare skin. Water bags could split, soaking your only dry bedding. But the alternative? Lying in bed, teeth chattering, waiting for sunrise like a desperate badger in a cave. You'll take your chances with the lava rock, and if you're truly living the high life, you don't just get one warmer, you get several. One for the feet, one for the centre, One for your spouse's side, maybe a backup near the pillows. A royal bed could resemble a makeshift medieval spa with glowing embers tucked into every corner like dangerous little hugs. Eventually, though, the warmers cool, the fire gutters out, and the night grows quiet again. You lie there, feet pressed against the stone that once saved you, and think about how tomorrow night you'll do it all over again. Because in a world without insulation, without heaters, without the blessed miracle of fleece, surviving winter sleep isn't just comfort, it's strategy. You're lying there, the last sliver of warmth from your footstone fading when something shifts. Not the fire, not the bedding, the bed itself. There's someone in it. Or multiple someones. And no, not in the scandalous sense. This is strictly thermal. Tonight, like many other frigid nights in the castle, you're not sleeping alone. Because in the icy vacuum of a medieval winter, the warmest thing in the world isn't a fire or a fir or a prayer to St. Olaf. It's another human body. This is the part where modern sensibilities squirm a little. After all, you're royalty. You're supposed to have privacy, a majestic bed all to yourself, and a door that shuts out the cold and the people. But in practice, that royal bed often had guests, and not just lovers or spouses. We're talking chambermaids, ladies-in-waiting, companions, advisors, and yes, even bodyguards, because nothing says sleep tight, your grace, like spooning with your armed protector. You shift beneath the covers, and sure enough, someone beside you stirs. Maybe it's your handmaid, dozing lightly after fetching your midnight wine. Maybe it's your groom of the stool. We'll save that title for another time. Whoever it is, they're sharing their body heat with you like a living, breathing, hot water bottle. And in this age of chill and draft, that's worth more than gold. It wasn't always full contact. Often, you'd sleep back to back or side by side with a respectable gap. A shared blanket, shared warmth, but not necessarily shared conversation. Royal beds were large enough to allow for this kind of arrangement, especially the great beds used in noble households. You could easily fit 3 or 4 people in one without it becoming a cuddle puddle, though honestly, those probably happened too. Here's a cold, hard historical fact. Bed sharing was wildly common in the medieval world, not just among royalty. Servants, soldiers, merchants, monks and horned travellers all shared beds, because beds were expensive and warmth was survival. A private bed was a mark of wealth. A private bed in a private room, practically divine. Most people bunked together without hesitation, age or gender aside. The only rule was, don't hog the blanket, and for heaven's sake keep your feet to yourself. But back to the royal chamber. You hear someone else entering now, softly padding across the rush-covered floor. It's another companion, just in from their own duties. They nod in your general direction and wordlessly slip under the opposite end of the covers. That's 3 now. You're 1 blanket short of a medieval group nap. And honestly, it's not the worst. Because every body that joins adds just a little more heat, like bricks added to a fireless oven. Let's pause for a moment of quirky truth. There are documented cases of kings sleeping with as many as 5 or 6 attendants during particularly brutal winters. And no, we're not talking orgies. We're talking strategic spooning. Some courts even had official sleep companions, selected not for their looks but their warmth and loyalty. If you were lucky, they didn't snore or drool, and yes, it got political. Sharing a royal bed, whether platonically or otherwise, was a mark of enormous favour. Being asked to sleep beside the monarch could mean you were trusted, relied upon, and possibly being groomed for higher office. Some courtiers vied for the honour, others avoided it like the plague, especially if the king was a restless sleeper, or the bed had fleas that week. That brings us to an open scholarly debate. Were these arrangements truly for warmth, or were they layered with strategy? Historians split hairs over whether bed sharing was purely practical or laced with deeper power dynamics. Was a queen's lady-in-waiting chosen for loyalty? Gossip potential? Or just because she didn't hog the covers? The truth is probably all of the above. In a medieval court, warmth and politics often curled up under the same blanket. And let's not forget the flip side, royal loneliness. Some monarchs, especially isolated or paranoid ones, chose to sleep alone despite the cold. They saw every extra body as a risk, of assassination, of betrayal, or just of getting kicked in the ribs by a snoring lord. Solitude was a luxury, but also a gamble. Because no amount of royal dignity can save you from the midnight frostbite that creeps in when you're sleeping alone in a stone box 40 feet above the frozen earth. But tonight, you've made peace with your bedfellows. It's warmer now. You've got someone at your back. The dog is curled at your feet, exhaling hot air that smells faintly of cooked meat and barnyard, but you'll take it. Another servant quietly slides into the room and tucks an extra fur around the pile of limbs. No one speaks. You're all too tired, too cold, too resigned to the idea that for all your status, winter still owns the night. Here's the beauty of it, though. This moment is almost peaceful. The quiet breathing of others, the layered furs pulled tight. The awareness that in a world designed to test your endurance at every turn, sometimes the best thing you can do is pile close together and just wait it out. Eventually you fall asleep again, not alone, but surrounded by soft snores, shifting weight, and the borrowed warmth of other lives. Your castle remains cold, your fireplace weak, your bed stuffed with linen, fur, and humanity. But you're warm, you're safe, and you'll make it through another medieval night, not by status or magic or divine right, but by the simple, stubborn heat of other people. Morning again, and this time you're tangled in something that definitely wasn't there when you fell asleep. An extra pelt of fur that smells vaguely like wet fox and old candle wax. You blink groggy and shift slightly, trying not to wake the body draped halfway across your legs. The fire has long gone out. There's frost forming on the inside of the windows again. But even so, there's a reluctant comfort in knowing that while the world outside is a sheet of ice, inside your little wool-wrapped world, you're not dead. You're just cold. Very, very cold. But not unprepared. Because while medieval castles were notoriously impossible to heat, royalty had an entire ecosystem of materials designed for one thing only: trapping heat against the royal body. And tonight, you've been sleeping under the warm embrace of the finest furs, feathers, and medieval fluff money could buy. Let's start with the basics. Your bedding. You pull back a corner slowly, like peeling open a warm pastry. There's layer after layer after layer, each one heavier than the last. Closest to you is the soft linen sheet, probably hand-woven, and embroidered with your royal crest or some wildly unnecessary bit of Latin. This sheet's only real job is to separate you from the rougher stuff above it. It's like a polite handshake before the bear hugs begin. Above the sheet comes the first quilt. It's thick and stitched through with wool batting, probably dyed a rich red or blue, colours associated with nobility and power, but also with the ability to hide wine spills, sweat, and whatever else leaks out of a human in the middle of the night. Quilts were often locally made, stuffed with raw fleece, and every so often home to a few stowaway critters who'd come along for the warmth. Charming. Then come the furs, and oh, what a variety there is. Right now, you're lying under a heavy fox fur, reddish soft, and just a bit greasy to the touch, because medieval fur conditioning wasn't exactly high-tech. But this is just one layer. A proper royal bed might be stacked with bear fur, thick and almost rubbery, wolf, symbolic and slightly terrifying, or if you're really elite. Ermine. Historical fact for today. Ermine, the white winter coat of the stoat, was the VIP of medieval bedding materials. So precious was this fur that it became symbolic of purity and royalty itself. Kings and queens had cloaks, bedspreads, even pillow trims lined with ermine. It was ridiculously soft, stunningly white, and so expensive that entire economies of small rodents died in the name of royal comfort. And yes, you're probably sleeping with it stitched to your blanket right now. Not that feathers were out of fashion either. Under your topmost furs there's likely a feather bed, essentially a thick, soft mattress topper stuffed with goose or swan feathers, hand-plucked and hand-fluffed to perfection. These weren't just soft, they trapped body heat like a dream. Lying on one was like sinking into a slightly crunchy cloud that smelled faintly of barnyard, and you had to shake it daily to keep it from forming into weird feathery lumps shaped like yesterday's regrets. Let's toss in a quirky detail here. Some beds, especially in northern Europe, were covered with patchwork quilts made from discarded clothing, royal cast-offs stitched together into one glorious sleep-ready mosaic. It was warmth, recycling, and political storytelling all in one. Imagine snoozing beneath a square of fabric once worn by your great-aunt, who allegedly hexed a bishop. Keeps things interesting. There's a kind of practical luxury in it all. Yes, it's heavy, so heavy in fact that you can barely roll over. But that's the point. All that weight pressed down against your limbs helped keep the heat in, reduced movement, and acted as a medieval anxiety blanket before anxiety blankets were cool. You weren't expected to toss and turn all night. You were expected to lie still, like a noble log in an elaborate fabric tomb. But let's not get too dreamy, because here's the kicker. All that warmth came at a price. These furs and feathers were alive in a way. Not literally, but in the medieval world, cleanliness was negotiable. Furs were rarely washed. Instead, they were beaten with sticks, aired out in the sun when the sun existed, and occasionally sprinkled with herbs or rose petals to refresh them. That's right, your bed smells nice, not because it's clean, but because someone hid mint leaves in it, which leads to the debate of the day. Were these beds as luxurious as they seem? Some historians argue yes, these materials were carefully chosen, lovingly maintained, and represented the absolute best sleep experience the era could provide. Others roll their eyes and point to parasite records, mouldy inventories, and records of royal complaints about stale air and mouse problems in the lower furs. It's the eternal battle between comfort and reality, played out in itchy sheets and questionable stitching. Still, as you lie there, half dreaming and trying to ignore the prickling sensation that might be a flea circus rehearsing on your ankle, you can't deny that it beats the alternative. Outside, the frost creeps along the windowsills. You hear a distant clatter, probably a servant dropping firewood. Your chamber is far from modern, far from efficient, but here, beneath pounds of hand-sewn warmth, you're cocooned like a butterfly that refuses to emerge until spring. You snuggle deeper, nose buried in the fur, fingers curled into the folds of the featherbed. The heat may be fading, but the layers are working. They don't care about wind or drafts or royal crises waiting downstairs. They're here to smother the cold and cradle you in the most medieval way possible. And in that moment, somewhere between shivering and suffocating, you realise this is what passes for comfort at the top of the feudal food chain. Your castle may have no insulation, your fire may be a joke, but your bed is a layered masterpiece of fluff, fur, and the faint scent of mothballs. Congratulations, Your Majesty. You may not have indoor plumbing, but you've got the fluffiest fox-scented fortress in the land. You're still swaddled in your pile of furs and feathers, warmish now, reluctant to move, until a gust of air slithers in through the curtains and hits you square in the face. It's sharp, damp, and absolutely disrespectful. You gasp, tuck your head further into the covers, and curse the one part of your body that's always left exposed, your head. And tonight, like every other winter night in your noble life, your head is fighting a personal war against the medieval cold. It's time to discuss one of the strangest and most underrated aspects of medieval royal sleepwear: nightcaps, nose wraps, and face blankets. Yes, these were real. Yes, you probably look ridiculous. And no, you didn't get a choice, because when it's so cold your breath is freezing in midair, fashion surrenders to survival. Let's start with the classic nightcap. You pull yours down now, adjusting the hem over your ears. It's soft, lined with wool, and has probably slipped sideways during the night, leaving you with an elegant tuft of bedhead shooting out one side. It's not the whimsical Scrooge in A Christmas Story style just yet. That's a bit later. But it's close. Long, conical, and tied at the base of your skull. Some had a tassel, some didn't. All of them were designed to do one thing: keep your scalp and ears from going numb while you slept inside your own fortress of fluff. Now here's your historical fact. Nightcaps weren't just cozy accessories, they were medical recommendations. Physicians of the time believed that cold air on the head could cause illness, madness, or even death. Covering your head wasn't optional, it was preventive medicine. If you died of brain freeze in 1364, no one would be surprised, but it didn't stop there. No, the cold had other entry points. Your nose, for example, a key vulnerability. Enter the nose wrap, a tragically real solution to the icicle that dangles from your face every time you exhale under the covers. Picture a soft band of cloth tied around your head like an awkward superhero mask, covering your nose and sometimes your mouth. Think sleep apnea machine, medieval edition. It kept the frost off your face and your dignity firmly on hold. And then there's the face blanket, which sounds fake but was 100% a thing. This was a small, square cloth, wool or thick linen, placed gently over the face before bed. Not for light blocking, not for skincare, just warmth. Sometimes tucked into your collar, sometimes just laid across like a napkin for your dreams. If it slipped during the night and smothered you a little, well, that's just part of the game. Here comes a delightfully quirky fact. In some courts, it was considered fashionable to have matching sleep sets, including nightcaps, hand mitts, and face cloths, all embroidered with the royal seal, or in some cases personalised prayer verses. Imagine lying there with a little face napkin that says, "God preserve the Queen from frostbite." Talk about luxury branding. Of course, none of this was particularly attractive. Medieval paintings rarely depict these bedtime accessories, probably because even the artists knew no one wanted to be immortalised wearing a wool sock on their head and a hand towel on their face. But rest assured, they were common. If you'd walked into a royal chamber at night, you'd see a lineup of sleeping nobles bundled like leftover dumplings, each one with their head wrapped up like a Christmas ham. There's a scholarly debate here too. Some historians argue that face coverings were more ceremonial than practical, linked to modesty, piety, or disease prevention. Others point to the overwhelming evidence of cold-related discomfort in castles and say, plainly, these people were freezing and desperate. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, just like the face blanket that keeps sliding off your chin every hour. Now imagine you've fallen back asleep, head bundled, nose wrapped, and face lightly blanketed. You look ridiculous, but you're warm, sort of. At least warmer than if you'd gone full bare-faced hero. But then you hear the sound, a sniffle, no, a snort, a sneeze. Someone nearby, your chambermaid maybe, has just unleashed a winter cough loud enough to shake the bed frame. You're immediately on edge, because illness doesn't just mean inconvenience. In the medieval world, it could mean death. And despite all the herbs, prayers, and garlic hung above the fireplace, people still believed that sickness came through the air, especially cold air. Hence the obsession with covering every orifice. It wasn't just about comfort. It was fear, baked into fabric. The idea that warm air was safe while cold air was filled with demons, miasmas, or whatever invisible monster the scholars were blaming this century. Wrapping your head wasn't fashion. It was a talisman. One thread away from superstition. But despite all these efforts, you still wake up with a cold nose. You always do. It pokes out of the bedding like a hopeful vole, only to be punished for its optimism. Some nights you try breathing into your pillow. Some nights you tuck your chin until your breath fogs up the inside of your nightcap. And once in a while you throw caution to the wind and sleep bareheaded, waking up with what can only be described as medieval morning regret. You throw the covers back slightly, peering around. Your chamber is still dim, still frosty. The windows are rimmed with delicate patterns of ice, like lace made of glass shards. Someone's placed your slippers by the bed, they're fur-lined, and somehow already cold. You tug your gap tighter, and prepare to leave the warmth of the bed for the bitter draught that lives just beyond the curtains. In the grand scheme of royal burdens, having to swaddle your head like a baked potato might seem small. But when you're waking up every morning with half a beard frozen and the sensation of a stone dagger in your sinuses, it starts to wear on you. You miss summer. You miss sun. You miss being able to breathe without face cloths and mummification. But tonight, when the fire dims and the winds rise again, you'll wrap your head, tuck your face and thank whatever medieval deity listens to royal complaints that you've got the gear to make it through another night. Even if you look like someone put a bonnet on a sad owl, you're scratching. You try to pretend you're not, but your fingers have already wandered toward your scalp. You tell yourself it's the dry air, or maybe the wool in your nightcap, or just one of those phantom itches that shows up when you're bored and can't scroll on anything. But no, this is real, and you already know the culprit, even before you make eye contact with the tiny, unwelcome invader crawling along the edge of your sleeve. Lice. Welcome to one of the most profoundly humbling realities of medieval royalty. No matter how rich, powerful, or divinely chosen you were still going to get lice. You sit up in bed, now fully aware of the crawling sensation on your scalp, and feel a wave of existential dread roll over you. You are the anointed monarch of a vast kingdom, commander of armies, possibly appointed by God himself, and yet here you are, bedhead tangled, furs bunched around your waist, scratching like a common serf. And that's just your head. You haven't even begun to consider the other popular real estate for lice, your eyebrows, your armpits, and oh yes, your royal nether regions. There were no safe zones. These weren't just head lice, there were body lice, pubic lice, delightfully nicknamed crabs, and all of them adored your medieval lifestyle. Linen shifts worn for days, thick woolen robes with zero ventilation, hair rarely washed, sweat-damp bedding, furry blankets. Add to that the fact that you sometimes shared a bed with half your staff and a lapdog, and boom, parasite paradise. Here's your historical fact for the evening. Even the grandest monarchs kept lice combs as standard items on their grooming tables. These were fine-toothed, often made of ivory or bone, and used daily by servants to comb through royal hair. They were also used communally, passed around, shared between family members, is sometimes borrowed by the same servant who just came from delousing someone else. So yes, it was less eliminating lice and more rearranging them creatively. You can still picture your valet from the day before patiently parting your hair in front of the mirror, flicking the comb into a cloth with the same expressionless calm you've seen him use to fold socks. He didn't flinch. You didn't flinch. That's just how it was. Lice weren't an emergency, they were part of the royal schedule. Now for a quirky little wrinkle in this itchy tale. Some people believed lice were a sign of holiness. That's right. In certain religious circles, lice were seen as proof of humility and piety, especially among monks and ascetics. The more lice you had, the more devoted you must be, because clearly you weren't wasting time on vain things like comfort or personal hygiene. So if you're scratching your neck at dinner and someone sees it, they might just assume you're halfway to sainthood. Small mercies. Still, even pious lice get annoying. Royal households employed remedies of varying creativity and horror. Powders made from crushed herbs, lavender, pennyroyal, rosemary were sprinkled into hair and bedding. Boiled vinegar was rubbed into scalps. Some even applied mercury ointments, because nothing says, let's deal with these bugs, like a touch of neurotoxic metal rubbed directly into the brain box. The side effects were noticeable. Your pillows aren't safe either. Feather-stuffed and rarely washed, they're the perfect home for creepy crawlies. You remember hearing that someone once tried baking their bedding in the kitchen oven to kill the lice. It worked, sort of. The lice died. The sheets caught fire. The room had to be rebuilt. Bit of a mixed result. This brings us to an open debate among historians. How bad was the lice situation really? Some argue that the constant presence of parasites has been exaggerated for dramatic effect. They suggest that wealthy households had the resources to manage the issue with reasonable effectiveness. Others point to inventories full of lice combs, hygiene manuals, and widespread remedies to argue the opposite. Lice was simply a fact of life, like cold stone floors and unreliable plumbing. And considering how much energy went into managing lice rather than eliminating them, it's safe to say the bugs were winning. You toss back the furs and swing your legs over the edge of the bed, sighing as you glance at your linens. Somewhere in there, despite the fresh rushes laid down yesterday, is a micro-ecosystem of insects, body heat, and lost crumbs. You're going to have to burn sage again, or at least swap out the bottom sheet if the servant hasn't already done it while you were dozing. But of course you'll be back in that same bed tonight, and the night after that, and the next one too. And so will they, lurking in your robes, hiding in your hats, the great equalizers of the Middle Ages. They didn't care if you had a crown on your head or a wooden spoon in your pocket. Your blood was their banquet. Even your dog, your sweet, spoiled, blanket-hogging dog curled up beside the hearth, is likely crawling with fleas, which, by the way, were often worse. Lice just bite and itch. Fleas hop. They dive into seams, infest cracks in the floor, and breed like tiny vampires on caffeine. And yet the dog stays. Because if it comes down to warmth or bugs, you always choose warmth. Eventually you accept it. You scratch, you sigh, and you pick up the little ivory comb from the bedside table. You start near the temple, slow practice strokes. You pause when you feel the catch. You flick it clean. Repeat. It's weirdly soothing. A bedtime ritual in a world where few things are clean and nothing is permanent. You're a ruler. Your throne may be made of gold, your castle may rise above the hills, but your scalp, that belongs to the lice now. You'd think by now you'd be used to the cold. After all, you've got the furs, the fire, even if it's mostly ceremonial, the stones, the layers, the snoring human hot water bottles, and yes, even your parasitic roommates. And yet, just as you begin to feel halfway comfortable, your nose catches something strange. Not strange like herbs or soot or wet wool. No, bad strange. Something sharp, thick, sour, creeping up through the floorboards like it's trying to crawl into bed with you. And that, dear royalty, is the unmistakable signature scent of the medieval castle. Smoke, chamber pots, sweat, mould, and open sewage. Because while the cold made your nights long and your toes brittle, the smells made the cold feel almost welcome. You shift under the covers, sniff again, and wrinkle your nose. The scent is definitely stronger this morning. Your best guess? It's the guard robe. That's the polite, architectural term for the royal toilet. A vertical chute in the castle wall that empties out somewhere. Into the moat, ideally. Onto a slope of frozen rocks, more likely. In summer, the stench is inescapable. In winter, at least it's slow, except today it seems to be having a moment. Let's break it down. Castles were designed to repel armies, not odours. Thick walls, narrow windows, and heavy wooden doors meant that air circulation was practically non-existent. Fires brought warmth, but also smoke. Servants brought food, but also body heat and breath and, well, themselves. And no one bathed daily, or weekly, or sometimes even monthly. Here's your historical fact. Medieval castle designers did try to incorporate ventilation, but it was crude at best. Small vents near fireplaces, slits in the roof, or tiny unglazed windows were all you had. In winter, most of those were shut or stuffed with fabric to keep the cold out, locking the smells in with you. Add in a few drying herbs stuffed under the rushes on the floor, and you've basically created a low-budget medieval air freshener. Spoiler, it didn't work. But here comes the icy irony. One of the only ways to manage the smell. Open the windows, that's right. In the depths of winter, with frost curling on your toes and ice creeping across your goblet, you'd have to crack a shutter, brace for a draft, and pray the fresh air didn't kill you. Because sometimes the stink was worse than the cold, and that's saying something. Of course, opening a window wasn't a solo affair. You're the monarch. You have people for that. So as you shiver under your blanket fortress, you mutter a sleepy command to the closest half-awake attendant. They shuffle to the window, unbolt the wooden shutter, and immediately curse under their breath as a gust of air punches the room like an offended ghost, and just like that, the scent retreats, but so does every trace of warmth you'd managed to gather overnight. Your breath fogs. The dog burrows deeper under your blankets. A tapestry flutters dramatically. You stare at the ceiling and wonder how the royal bloodline survived this long without being frozen into extinction. Now for your quirky fact. Some royals had portable scent boxes, small wooden or metal cases filled with dried flowers, spices and herbs. Think of it as a medieval Glade plug-in, only you carried it around and sniffed it when things got unbearable. You might hang it from your neck, tuck it into your sleeve, or even sleep with it under your pillow. Your favourites might include rose petals, cloves, dried orange peel, or, if you're feeling particularly aggressive, frankincense. You're not trying to remove the cell, just fight it with prettier ones. Still, nothing truly masked the core issue. That scent of damp stone and centuries of human presence lingered everywhere. Between the sweat absorbed into your tapestries and the mould that crept up the outer walls after every frost-thaw cycle, your bedroom was not exactly a spa. And if you happened to be slightly ill, say, with a touch of plague or a suspicious fever, let's just say no one was lighting candles and bringing you eucalyptus steam. This leads us neatly into a scholarly debate that still lingers like the ghost of chamber pots past. Did medieval people notice the smell? Some researchers argue that, accustomed to the world around them, they simply didn't find it offensive. It was their normal. Others suggest that given the widespread use of herbs, incense and perfumes, especially in wealthy households, people did notice. They just didn't have many options. You might not complain about the smell of unwashed wool if you've never not smelled it. There were strategies, of course. Tapestries and carpets weren't just decorative, they were absorptive. Rushes scattered on the floor were replaced regularly, in theory, soaked in rosewater or sprinkled with mint. Some castles had draught towers designed to catch wind and send it through the upper chambers. And yet, on mornings like this, it was clear. The castle was winning. You were living inside a beautiful freezing medieval armpit. You pull the furs tighter and let your mind wander. Maybe this is why so many monarchs built hunting lodges or palace annexes, not for pleasure, but to escape the funk. Or maybe it's why everyone was obsessed with incense. Light enough of it and you can convince yourself that the faint smell of deer urine drifting in from the courtyard is just earthy. Eventually the window is shut again. The breeze is gone. The air inside settles into that awful familiar equilibrium. Warmth returns slowly like a lazy cat. The dog rolls over, exposing a belly that smells like roasted turnip and regret. You lie back and stare at the rafters. You're not entirely sure what part of your castle that smell came from this time. The guardrobe, the hall, the dog's corner, the cook who sleeps 2 floors down and hasn't changed his tunic since Michaelmas. All you know is that no matter how many furs you stack, how many face cloths you wrap, or how many bricks you warm, the castle finds a way to remind you. You live in it, but it owns you. And yet, as with everything else you endure, the smell will fade, or you'll stop more noticing. Someone will air the bedding, someone else will swap the rushes. You'll dunk your sleeves in lavender water and go on pretending, because surviving winter in a medieval castle isn't about defeating the cold or the stink, it's about outlasting them. By now, you're almost used to the routine, your bed a fortress of furs, your face half wrapped like a burrito in linen, the fire stubbornly wheezing in the hearth, and your nose eternally cold no matter how many nosecloths or herbal satchels you keep under your pillow. But tonight, something feels different. Not colder, not smellier, heavier, not the bedding, your thoughts. Because once the castle quiets down and the servants whisper their way out of the room, and the rushes have been swept and relaid, and the windows shuttered against the howling wind, there's nothing left but stillness. And that's when it happens. The dreams, the omens, the rituals. The medieval brain, it turns out, doesn't rest quietly. You lie there, nestled between your fur-lined featherbed and a half-snoring courtier who's clearly dreaming about hunting rabbits, judging by the kicks, and your eyes flick open into the darkness. It's not fear, not exactly, more like awareness, the kind that tingles up your spine when something in the air feels a little too quiet. This isn't just the wind moaning across the towers, this is something else. Because in the Middle Ages, night wasn't just the absence of sun, it was a liminal space where the spiritual and the real braided themselves together, like the embroidery on your bed curtains. Dreams weren't dreams, they were messages, omens, visions. Warnings, sometimes vows, if you were lucky, prophecies. Here's your historical fact. Dream interpretation was practically a sub-discipline in medieval royal courts. Monarchs kept dream books, compilations of symbols, signs and meanings passed down from classical texts, religious authorities and village wisdom. If you dreamed of water, it might mean trouble. A lion could mean power. Or betrayal. A flying fish. Probably too much spiced wine before bed, but best to check with your local monk just to be safe. And yes, monarchs took this very seriously. Some consulted personal confessors immediately upon waking, describing their dreams in intimate, breathless detail, hoping for clarity or reassurance. Others kept astrologers or mystics on retainer, whose job was not only to read the stars, but also the shadows of sleep. If you had a strange dream involving bleeding roses or weeping statues, someone was definitely going to sketch it onto a scroll and read way too much into it. But dreams were only half of it. The other half? Bedtime rituals, a carefully choreographed routine designed to protect your royal soul from whatever lurked in the medieval night. Before bed, your chaplain would have led you in evening prayers. You'd kneel stiffly by the bed, murmuring the same Latin verses you've recited since childhood. Maybe the Ave Maria, maybe the Te Lucius ante terminum, literally, to thee before the close of day. A nightly plea for protection from nightmares, demons, or your own suspiciously ambitious younger brother. And then, after the prayers, the other rituals came into play. The hidden ones, the superstitions. You might tuck a relic under your pillow, a saint's bone, a fragment of a blessed veil, even a scrap of wood that someone swears came from the true cross. Not for show, for safety. Dreams were a battleground, and you were not going in unarmed. Here comes your quirky fact. Some royal households placed blessed eggshells in the rafters above the bed to ward off night spirits. Others scattered salt in a ring around the room or placed a silver coin beneath the mattress to confuse evil beings. You might even sleep with your fingers clenched around a prayer bead, half in ritual, half in fear. And don't think for a second that nightmares were brushed off. If you woke sweating, gasping, insisting that a figure cloaked in red had whispered your name from the corner, people would listen. They'd gather, analyse, offer interpretations. Was it a warning of betrayal, a sign of political change, or something darker? This leads us to a scholarly debate that still stirs the candlelit halls of academic journals. Were these dream rituals genuinely spiritual, or a form of medieval therapy? Some argue they were ways to process the stress and pressure of ruling, coded language for the psychological strain of power. Others insist they were direct links to a supernatural world that felt, at the time, no more distant than your neighbour's tower. Either way, the result was the same. You, lying wide-eyed in bed, wondering what it meant when your horse turned into a woman and told you to trust no one. There's also the matter of bed positioning. You might not think about it, but someone definitely did. Sleeping with your head to the east was ideal. It symbolised facing Jerusalem and welcomed divine dreams. North was neutral. South? Risky. West? That was the direction of the dead. You'd only sleep that way if you had no intention of waking up, or if you were an idiot. And all of this is layered over the simple, ever-present knowledge that in the cold, chaotic night of a medieval winter, your dreams might be the only communication you get from the divine. The church bells are silent, the priests are asleep, the fires are dying, but the dream? That could be a whisper from God, or a warning from the devil, or both. Who's to say? So you lie there, eyes open, listening to the wind rattle the shutters and the creak of the roof timbers above. Your hand rests lightly on the charm under your pillow, your nightcap pulled tight, the edge of a fur blanket brushing your chin. You're exhausted, but alert, because this is the hour when secrets are revealed. And when dawn comes, you'll have to explain whatever vision came to you, no matter how strange. And if no dream comes, that's a message too. Eventually you close your eyes again, not because you're ready to sleep, but because you're ready to receive. The darkness presses in, the fire gives one last spit, and the line between you and whatever lives in the dream world begins to blur. You don't just sleep in a medieval castle, you surrender to it, and sometimes it talks back. The rooster hasn't crowed yet, but you can already hear movement in the chamber. Soft footsteps, fabric swishing, a cough muffled by a sleeve. You lie perfectly still, not out of sleepiness, but because it's the only defence you have left against the blunt and awkward reality that royal bedrooms, especially in castles, are never, ever private. Even in the darkest hours of a medieval winter night, your royal chamber hums with life, and if you thought that being king or queen meant peace and quiet, solitude, or the ability to get up and scratch your backside without an audience, well, surprise. You're more stage prop than sovereign in your own bed. You roll onto your side carefully and peek through the slit between two heavy bed curtains. The fire's still low, the rushes on the floor rustle softly underfoot, and one of your ladies in waiting is moving about in half darkness, folding something, probably one of the 3 cloaks you carelessly kicked off during your midnight hot flash. She's quiet, trained in the art of pre-dawn invisibility, but still there, always there. Let's get this out of the way. Medieval royalty did not sleep alone, not really. Not unless they were sick or being quarantined, or suspected someone was trying to poison them, in which case they still weren't alone, they were just guarded. The royal bedchamber was a living space, not just a sleeping one. It was the nerve centre of the sovereign's domestic life, and that meant people, constantly. Servants came and went at all hours. Guards stationed by the door shifted and whispered. The fire tender might creep in at 2 a.m. to quietly stoke the embers. Even in the deepest night, there were always eyes, always ears, always someone just behind the tapestry trying not to breathe too loudly. Here's your historical fact. Some monarchs employed a role literally called the gentleman of the bedchamber, or mistress of the robes, depending on gender and century, whose duty wasn't just to help you dress, but to monitor your sleeping environment. They might help you into bed, check the warmth of the bedding, ensure the dog is properly curled at your feet, and then sit nearby, sometimes through the entire night, in a chair, in the dark, just there. And no, they weren't lurking for sinister reasons. They were there for safety, protocol, sometimes gossip, often loyalty optics. If something happened to you overnight, an illness, a seizure, prophetic dream involving flaming wolves, someone had to witness it. Otherwise, how would anyone believe you? Of course, there's the less glamorous side to all this, bodily functions. You're under layers of fur and linen, wrapped like a caterpillar in winter, and nature calls. This is not a private event. A chamber pot, likely ceramic, possibly silver if you're feeling fancy, is placed within reach. But you're not emptying it. Someone else is, possibly while humming. Probably before you've fully pulled your nightrobe back down. That brings us to the quirky fact of this section. There are records of kings and queens having their chamber pots heated before use on cold nights. Not the contents, thankfully, but the actual ceramic, warmed by the fire and then slipped discreetly beside the bed. Because nothing screams, "I am the monarch of all I survey," like having your nighttime toilet warmed by a guy named Godfrey. Now for the real kicker. Even diplomacy crept into the royal bedchamber. It wasn't unheard of for important discussions to take place before the monarch got out of bed. You might still be rubbing sleep from your eyes, hair flattened on one side like a squashed hedgehog, while a noble or ambassador leans in to whisper some urgent news or request a royal decision. Pyjamas, optional, politics, constant. Which leads us into the open scholarly debate. Was this lack of privacy comforting or unbearable? Some historians argue that medieval royals viewed their entourage as a natural extension of their identity, loyalists, protectors, walking proof of status. Others suggest it was suffocating, that the weight of being constantly observed, even in the most intimate, vulnerable hours, was part of why many monarchs unravelled, physically, emotionally, or spiritually. And for the record, even your royal bed was not off limits to these interlopers. It wasn't uncommon for servants to enter the bed itself, albeit briefly, to help warm it before you arrived, or to adjust the bedding while you were already tucked in. The idea of sacred personal space just didn't exist the way it does now. Your bed was a throne horizontal, a place of fire and power, always has witnesses. You close your eyes again just for a moment, and you can feel it. The weight of the room, the silent choreography of movement, the unspoken hierarchy of who may speak first, the servant who dares not wake you but must be present in case you stir, the courtier standing just inside the chamber door waiting for news of your mood before she reports to the council. Even the dog is awake, watching them all, likely wondering when someone's going to drop a meat scrap on the floor. And then there's the emotional layer. You're a ruler, yes, but you're also human. And humans, no matter how powerful, sometimes want to be alone. To cry, to stretch, to snore unguarded. To wake from a dream and not feel 3 pairs of eyes nervously pretending they didn't hear you talking in your sleep. But the castle doesn't allow for that. Not in winter. Not ever, really. Still, you accept it, like everything else. You learn to stretch beneath the sheets as silently as possible, to whisper commands through the curtain when you can't bear to speak above a murmur, to pretend you don't notice the shadow of a body stationed by your bedside all night like a statue. You get used to never really being alone, and maybe that's the strangest part, that one day when you're older and more fragile, and the court has finally left you in peace for a night, just one by accident or design, you'll lie awake staring into the stillness, missing the quiet rustle of footsteps and the soft snore of your faithful lady's maid sleeping across the room. Because royal solitude, it sounds noble, but here in the thick of a medieval winter, company means survival, even if that company occasionally trips over the dog on their way to fold your blanket. You blink awake in the darkness and something is wrong. Off. Off in the way that makes your instincts twitch before your thoughts catch up. You shift beneath the covers, slowly, carefully, and there it is again. A soft crunch, a crackle. Your fingers reach out beyond the fur-lined cocoon and land on something powdery, brittle, cold, snow, inside. You sit up like a corpse rising from a tomb, and as your eyes adjust to the dim light you see it. A light dusting of snow on the wooden floorboards, a frosty glitter clinging to the edge of the rushes near the hearth, and, somehow worse, a thin line of white settled right along the inner edge of the bed curtain. Let's take a moment, shall we? You are royalty. You are sleeping in a fortified, turreted stone castle, a literal fortress. You have walls thick enough to repel cannonballs, servants trained to anticipate your every flinch, and bedding that costs more than a village makes in a year. And yet, you are waking up with snow in your bedroom. Welcome to the joyful experience of medieval insulation, or rather, the total lack of it. Here's your historical fact of the night. Most medieval castles, particularly in northern Europe, were so poorly sealed that the snow, rain and wind could and did infiltrate indoor spaces regularly. Windows were often little more than open slits or filled with horn-oiled parchment or fragile glass, which cracked in the cold, roof beams shifted. Tiles fell loose, mortar flaked away, and when the wind howled just right, it carried the outside world directly into your private chamber. You step cautiously from the bed, feet landing on the floor with a hiss of discomfort. The air is so sharp it feels like it's cutting your skin. You wrap your robe tighter, but it's like throwing a towel at a blizzard. There's snow on your writing desk, snow on your shoes, a perfect little drift forming in the corner where the wall meets the window. And here's the kicker. This wasn't even considered abnormal. Winter came inside during the colder months. Entire hallways would freeze over. Water jugs left out overnight became solid blocks by morning. Your personal basin for washing? Useless. The water has a layer of ice so thick it could support a small dog. Now for the quirky fact, some royals had special bed canopies designed with slanted tops, not just for visual flair, but to help any falling plaster, snowflakes or wayward animal droppings from above slide off to the side of the bed rather than onto their sleeping face. That's right. Your bed was armoured not just for comfort, but against the weather inside your own room. And yes, people tried to fix this. Servants stuffed the window frames with wool moss or wax cloth. Wooden shutters were reinforced. Tapestries were hung thick across walls and windows in an attempt to seal in warmth and block drafts. But in a building made of stone designed centuries before the idea of central heating, it was like patching a sinking ship with parchment and prayer. This leads to a surprisingly fierce debate among historians. How much did the cold affect royal life? Was it just background discomfort, tolerated like bad smells and itchy fabrics? Or was it a genuine, constant battle, shaping sleep, mood, politics, and even health? Some letters from the time suggest royals were made genuinely miserable by the chill, describing numb fingers, stiffened limbs, and air so sharp it sears the throat. Others hint at a sort of grim acceptance, like the cold was just another unpleasant advisor to be tolerated. But there's also the symbolic weight of it. Snow inside your chamber is a kind of metaphor. You're the ruler, and yet there are things you can't stop. You control armies, coinage, courtly rituals, but not the wind, not the frost, not the slow leak of cold that creeps under your door and settles on your bed like a second colder crown. You cross the room, teeth clenched, and stare at the window. The shutters warped again, probably the moisture. You make a note to have someone repair it, though they'll have to chisel the ice away first, and they'll definitely complain the whole time. A servant enters, startled by the sight of you already awake. They look sheepish, maybe even apologetic, but you wave them toward the hearth. No scolding this morning. You're too frozen to speak. You sit in your chair, layered in robes, watching the snow slowly melt in the heat of the newly stoked fire. A puddle forms at the base of a tapestry. Somewhere in the hall below, someone slips and curses. It's like watching the Weather Channel, except inside your bedroom. And here's the strangest part. You begin to appreciate it. Not enjoy it, but admire it in a way. The brutal honesty of winter. It doesn't care who you are. It walks through stone walls, shrugs at velvet, and lays its icy hand across your brow whether you're a king or a chambermaid. It's equalizing, in a way, humbling. A reminder that nature is not impressed by your titles or your crowns. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders and watch your breath fog in the air. You're already dreading the return to bed tonight, when the damp from today's melting snow will have wicked into the mattress and frozen solid again. But there's no escaping it. This is castle life in winter, ornate, imposing, drafty as a ruined barn. So you sit, steaming gently in your fur robe, watching snowflakes drift in from the warped corner of the shutter. You could order it repaired, of course you will, but it doesn't really matter. Another storm will come, another tile will slip, and one night soon you'll wake again to snow on your pillow, flakes resting gently on your royal forehead, like winter giving you a kiss good night. If that isn't regal, you don't know what is. You didn't sleep, not really. You closed your eyes, you tossed, you turned, well, as much as a human burrito under 15 pounds of damp wool and fox fur can turn. But true sleep, no. It slipped past you all night like a ghost in the hallways, and now the dawn has the nerve to peek through the shutter cracks with that smug grey light as if to say, "Well, did you rest well, your majesty?" No. No, you absolutely did not. Welcome to the dark and drafty reality of royal insomnia in the medieval castle. A frustrating, lingering curse that even the thickest featherbed and warmest lapdog couldn't fix. And while your advisors think you wake up grumpy because your wine was slightly too tepid or someone dared to cough during Vespers, the truth is simpler. You haven't truly slept in weeks. The thing is, medieval royals didn't just go to bed physically exhausted. They went to bed mentally on fire. You are at all times shouldering the kingdom. Laws, taxes, religious duties, bloodlines, political marriages, treasonous cousins, rumours of famine. Another bishop who insists he found a sacred relic in his garden and now demands an audience. And that's just the morning briefing. At night, when the fires dim and your attendants retreat behind their curtains, you're alone with all of it. And that silence, that long unbroken hush that falls over the castle like a blanket of snow, that's when the worry sets in. Here's your historical fact. Insomnia was recognised, though not called that name, as a real affliction during the Middle Ages. It was attributed to melancholy or an imbalance of bodily humours, particularly black bile. Some physicians claimed it came from eating too much heavy meat at dinner, or from thinking too hard before bed, or, my personal favourite, from excessive royal anxiety. Imagine that. insomnia caused by having too much power. Of course, the solutions offered weren't especially helpful. Warm milk, prayers, incense, a light forehead massage with rose oil. One particularly spicy remedy involved a mix of opium and crushed poppy seeds, which sure would knock you out, but might also give you dreams that made you accuse the butler of being the Antichrist. You sit up now, rubbing your eyes, the world still hazy with that uniquely cruel blend of sleep deprivation and castle cold. There's a pain behind your eyes, not quite a headache, more like the ghost of 1,000 unspoken worries tap dancing on your frontal lobe. And even though you've slept in this same chamber for years, this grand, towering room with its arched ceiling and mournful fireplace, it feels hostile this morning. The shadows in the corners haven't softened yet. The cold seems meaner. You glance toward the tapestries, half expecting them to lean in and whisper all the things you're already thinking. Quirky fact time. Some monarchs dealt with their insomnia by writing poetry, or letters, or notes that vaguely threatened their political rivals in elegant cursive. King Henry VI was reportedly so deeply affected by insomnia and melancholy that he'd sometimes sit alone in the darkness, mumbling prayers for hours while his court whispered about whether or not he'd lost his grip entirely. You wouldn't say you've lost your grip, not yet, but you did spend 15 minutes last night mentally rearranging your counsel based on who snored the least. And that's not a great sign. You try to drink. The wine in the goblet beside your bed has frozen over. Of course it has. You try to laugh. It comes out as a dry croak. There's a knock. One of your attendants peers through the curtain with a cautious expression. They're used to this by now. They know you had a bad night, which is noble code for didn't sleep and mentally assassinated 3 nobles before breakfast. They begin the morning routine, firewood added to the hearth, a basin of warm water for your face if they remembered to thaw it early enough, your slippers placed just so, your clothing warmed as best they can, although warm in this context just means not actually damp. Meanwhile, you sit in the bed, wrapped in fur, tearing at a single point on the wall. The carving above the fireplace, 2 lions battling a serpent, feels suddenly metaphorical. You wonder briefly which one you are today. Then you blink and realise you've been staring for 10 minutes without blinking. Here's where the scholarly debate enters. Was insomnia in royal circles common or just dramatic? Some historians suggest it was rampant, that rulers, even in pre-modern times, lived with constant unrest, whether from internal threats or existential dread. Others say it's overblown, that many monarchs likely slept just fine, thank you, and that the letters, complaints and poems were more about performance than pathology. But when you've lived the night you just did, staring up at a wooden canopy while your brain replays every poor harvest and suspicious noble smile you've seen in the last month, you're inclined to side with the former. This is more than bad sleep. This is chronic, cold-fueled, anxiety-wrapped insomnia with a crown on its head. Of course, you can't complain. Monarchs don't get that luxury. If you say you're tired, someone assumes you're weak. If you admit to sleeplessness, your enemies will call you unfit. And if you let it show, the court will whisper. They always do, so you arise, slowly, carefully. Like someone trying to hold their dignity together with frostbitten fingers. You accept the warmed robe, you step into the slippers, you nod at the servant who's waiting to brush your hair into something that doesn't scream haunted and unravelling. You pretend everything is fine, but inside you're counting the hours until you can try again. Until the bed is turned down, the curtains drawn, the fire lit, the quiet returns. You tell yourself maybe tonight you'll sleep. Maybe the weight of the crown will lift just a little. Maybe the bed will be warm enough. The wind will be soft enough. The thoughts will pause long enough. And maybe, just maybe, you'll close your eyes and rest. But you already know better. You're back in bed. Not because you're tired, though of course you are, but because your advisors told you to be. And when advisors start strongly encouraging rest, it's usually because there's some diplomatic crisis brewing in the other wing of the castle, and they need you to be upright, composed, and at least pretending to be well rested by the time foreign boots hit the throne room. So here you are again, under the same pile of furs, staring at the canopy above you, wondering which one of your so-called allies is going to crawl into your bed next, politically speaking, of course. Because tonight isn't just about sleeping, it's about sharing the royal bed with someone you're not entirely sure won't stab you in the back before breakfast. Welcome to the glorious, awkward tradition of diplomatic bed sharing, a practice that sounds absurd now, but in the medieval world was just another Tuesday. You hear them coming before they arrive, the soft shuffle of multiple feet, the clearing of a throat, the squeal of an unoiled hinge. Then the curtain parts. Standing there, freshly perfumed and trying not to look too eager, is your guest, an ambassador, a cousin, a royal from a neighbouring kingdom you may or may not have tried to invade last year. They bow, they smile, you motion them in. This somehow is perfectly normal. Let's dive into a historical fact that's somehow both deeply strange and entirely accurate. In medieval courts, bed sharing was often a tool of diplomacy. Sleeping in the same bed signalled trust or intimacy, not always sexual, and mutual understanding. To invite someone into your bedchamber or into the bed itself wasn't necessarily romantic, it was political theatre. Played under woolen blankets with one eye open, kings hosted nobles this way, dukes climbed into beds with visiting lords, foreign princes curled up beside future in-laws. Even treaties were sometimes hammered out in bed, with wine, whispers and blankets pulled up to the chin. Makes sense, in a way. Bedrooms were private spaces, invitations implied favour. If someone was in your bed, they were likely not plotting against you, at least not that night. Plus, castle walls were thin, and so was trust. A shared bed meant fewer secrets, fewer eavesdroppers, and a better chance of catching your guest's facial expression when they talked about dividing up your southern borderlands. But here's the thing no one talks about. It was always weird. You're lying beside someone you barely know who speaks a different dialect, smells like foreign spices, and has the blanket etiquette of a barbarian. One leg is already sprawled over your side. They're snoring, loudly, possibly on purpose. This isn't diplomacy, this is bedtime hostage negotiation. Quirky fact incoming. One 15th century duke reportedly shared his bed with over 40 different diplomats across his reign. Some visits lasted days, some hours. One poor noble was apparently kicked awake every time he rolled too close to the duke's prized ermine-lined pillow. Because royal bed sharing didn't mean equality, it meant proximity to power, and proximity, as it turns out, is deeply uncomfortable. There were, of course, unspoken rules. No talking after the candle goes out. Don't hog the fur. Stay on your side unless specifically invited. Don't mention politics unless the monarch does first. And if you must break wind, make it subtle. In theory, the bed was a place of peace, trust, and strategic bonding. In reality, it was a minefield made of linen, awkward conversation, and passive-aggressive snoring. Now for the scholarly debate. Were these bed-sharing moments truly effective in diplomacy? Some historians say yes. Proximity created vulnerability, which created honesty. Secrets were shared. Trust was built. Others argue that it was all for show, that real politics happened in private chambers and smoky war rooms, and that bed-sharing was more about signalling loyalty to courtiers than actually building it. But back to you, lying here beside this half-dozing representative from a region you can't pronounce, trying not to flinch every time they twitch. They brought their own nightcap. It's embroidered with little lions. You're trying not to laugh. Earlier you discussed trade tariffs. Now you're both pretending the conversation didn't happen, like two kids forced to share a tent at summer camp after a fight. The fire crackles. The ambassador coughs once, twice. You pretend not to notice. Eventually, they whisper something, a compliment maybe, or a half-hearted joke about the excellent draft control in your bedchamber. You grunt. They laugh a little too hard. You both adjust your pillows, and then you're silent again, each of you aware that tomorrow morning you'll stand beside one another in the hall as if you hadn't just spent the night 2 inches apart in the same bed. One of you clinging to the edge like a cliffside monk. Sometimes the most powerful tool in diplomacy isn't a sword or scroll or speech. It's a bed. Specifically your bed. The one where you feign sleep while trying to read the political intent behind how someone folds their blanket. And maybe, just maybe, where alliances are sealed not with blood but with shared silence. Eventually your guest's breathing evens out. You listen to the rhythms, study them the way you might study a treaty. You're not sure if they're faking sleep, and honestly you don't care. You're too tired to care. You scoot slightly closer to the fireside of the bed, pull the fur up over your nose and let your eyes fall shut. Tomorrow you'll smile and toast and make promises you don't intend to keep. But tonight, you just hope they don't kick. You wake in the dark, lips dry, throat tight and stomach growling like a caged bear. You blink a few times, half hoping it's morning so you can summon something warm and greasy from the kitchens. But no, it's still the dead of night. The fire's nearly gone, just a few gasping embers, and your chamber is cold enough to remind you that yes, you live in a stone box, and yes, the air is still trying to kill you. The foreign diplomat you're sharing the bed with is snoring peacefully, utterly unaware that you're slowly being consumed by midnight hunger. And worse, the possibility that your ale is frozen solid. You shift carefully under the furs, reaching toward the small side table where a few humble luxuries have been laid out, a ceramic jug of ale, a pewter cup, a plate covered with a linen cloth. With stiff fingers, you pull back the cloth. Ah yes, the Feast of Kings, 2 pieces of cold bread, a wedge of hard cheese and a boiled egg that now feels like a tiny glacier. You pick up the ale jug. It sloshes, but barely. A thick rim of ice clings to the inside. The cup, when you tip the jug, yields a sad, slushy half-pour of lukewarm despair. You sip it anyway. Welcome to the royal reality of midnight snacks in a medieval winter. Less decadent indulgence, more survival grazing in the frozen wilderness of your own bedroom. Let's get historical for a second. Medieval nighttime meals weren't formal or elaborate, but it wasn't unusual for royalty to request food to be left within arm's reach at night, particularly in colder months when long nights made for long hours of tossing, turning, and inevitably craving something to gnaw on. Historical fact time: late-night eating wasn't always indulgent, it was often medicinal. Royal physicians might prescribe a small meal before bed to calm nerves or aid digestion. Bread dipped in wine, a few slices of roast meat, or a warm posset made from curdled milk, ale and spices. Was it tasty? Questionable. Did it help you sleep? Arguably. Did it give you horrific dreams involving flaming goats and talking turnips? Almost definitely. But back to you and your extremely frozen midnight picnic. You manage to break the bread with a decisive snap, chewing it slowly while trying not to wake your diplomatic bedmate. The cheese is hard but tolerable. The egg is, well, it's cold, but at least it's food. You're not savouring so much as enduring. Every bite is a reminder that even the most powerful figure in the realm still has to battle frozen cheese at 3 a.m. And that's not even getting into drinks. Your ale is a disappointment. Cold, slushy, and rapidly moving toward a ice chunk. In better months, you'd have warm, spiced wine delivered, steaming in a heavy goblet rich with cinnamon and clove, but not in winter, unless someone reheated it over the fire just minutes ago. It would be lukewarm at best and frigid by the time it reached your lips. Let's take a moment to appreciate a quirky medieval beverage, the caudle. A sort of proto-smoothie meets porridge. It was made by mixing warm wine or ale with egg yolks, sugar, and spice. Served thick and sweet, it was believed to strengthen the weak, comfort the sick, and warm the bonans. Think of it as medieval NyQuil, with chunks, royals swore by it. Monks made their own versions. You once had one that tasted suspiciously like an old pudding and regret. You drank the whole cup anyway. Back to the present. You sigh, wiping your hands on the cloth, and glance over at the slumbering ambassador beside you, who mumbles something unintelligible in his sleep and shifts dramatically, stealing most of the blanket in the process. You let it go. The cheese was yours. The warmth apparently is his. Now here comes the debate historians still chew on like a stale biscuit. Were midnight snacks common for royalty or a rare indulgence? Some records suggest that kings and queens often requested food at odd hours, especially during long winter nights when sleep was elusive. Others argue that the concept of snacking was frowned upon, seen as gluttonous or disorderly, particularly among the pious. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. If you were royal, you did what you pleased until your confessor found out. Still, practicality always won in the end. Cold nights and long hours meant calories were needed, and a warm belly helped lull the anxious brain to sleep. So food was brought, stored, wrapped in cloth, and left within reach. Sometimes it was consumed, sometimes it froze. Occasionally it attracted mice. You glance around the chamber now, scanning for movement. Nothing obvious, but you know the rodents are here. They always are. Somewhere in the walls, behind the tapestries, under the rushes, little eyes watch and wait. You make a mental note to request more cats, or stronger dogs, or perhaps just a ceremonial sword beside the bread plate. You down the last of your slushy ale and sigh. It wasn't satisfying, it wasn't pleasant, but it helped. A little weight in your stomach, a little distraction from the insomnia, the frost, the endless weight of ruling. It's enough. You settle back into bed, carefully navigating the diplomatic blanket divide. You tug your fur back up to your chin, tuck your feet under the warmer stone, and try not to think about how long it will take to fall asleep again. Eventually, your body remembers that it's fed, that the fire's still faintly glowing, that maybe you're safe for now. The cold is still there, curling at the edges like a patient enemy. But with a bit of bread in your belly and a lump of half-frozen cheese weighing you down, you feel better. Not great, not cosy, but better. And in a medieval castle in the depths of winter, that's a luxury worth savouring. The castle is quiet again, and you're just starting to drift when something soft and rhythmic breaks through the stillness. Bells. Faint, distant, echoing through the cold stone corridors like a whisper from another world. They aren't loud, not at this hour, but you recognise them instantly. Monastic bells. Somewhere on the grounds, perhaps just beyond the garden wall or down the hill, where the abbey presses against the winter-dark horizon, the monks are waking for their night office. You lie still and listen, the chime barely a flicker in the icy hush of your chamber. It makes you think about them, those quiet men cloaked in wool and silence, who sleep under even harsher conditions than you. No servants, no fox fur coverlets, no coals smouldering in silver bed warmers, just rough pallets, thin blankets, and the expectation of spiritual endurance. Tonight, while you struggle to sleep in a mountain of luxury, they rise from bare boards and walk barefoot to chant prayers in a stone chapel colder than a tomb. Let's talk about how monks slept in comparison to kings and queens, because the contrast is as sharp as the morning frost on your window panes. You're a ruler with a bed that requires 2 people to make and 3 to heat. A monk, on the other hand, might sleep on a wooden bench, or a simple straw mat on the floor. Their blanket, a rough woolen habit doubled over perhaps, maybe a thin sheet if the priory was well funded. Historical fact time, most monastic orders followed a regimented sleep schedule, known as the horarium. In winter, they might go to bed around 8 or 9 p.m, only to rise again at midnight, or earlier, for matins, the first and longest of their daily prayers. After the office, they'd return to bed for a few hours, then rise again around dawn for lauds. Yes, you heard that right. They broke their sleep on purpose, for God. In a building without fires, wearing a robe that probably hasn't been properly washed in months. You, in comparison, live like a snow-draped deity. But still, you envy them, don't you? Just a little. Their purpose is clear. Their sleep may be uncomfortable, but their dreams are undisturbed by taxes, heirs, or diplomatic guests who sprawl across your side of the mattress. Of course, the monk's life wasn't exactly restful. Cold, absolutely. Unbearable cold. In fact, monastic chroniclers occasionally recorded winters so brutal that the ink in their quills froze mid-sentence and their fingers bled from handling books in unheated libraries. They didn't just sleep through the cold, they worked, prayed, and thrived in it. Or at least suffered with a level of holy determination that most lay people couldn't fathom. And now for your quirky fact. Some monks were so committed to austerity that they refused to use bedding at all. One particularly stoic group, the Carthusians, were known to sleep in their habits, on wooden planks, using bricks or logs for pillows. Bricks. You try to imagine sleeping on a brick. You can't even sleep on a feather pillow without grumbling that it's gone flat. This brings us to a more thoughtful comparison, a quiet scholarly debate about how suffering was seen as a virtue in the medieval religious world. For monks, the cold wasn't just something to endure, it was a spiritual test, a means of purifying the soul, drawing closer to God through physical hardship. Meanwhile, in the secular world, particularly among the nobility, cold was the enemy, something to fight with fire, fur, and manpower. For you, warmth was a mark of success. For a monk, it might be a sign of weakness. Still, the lines weren't so clear-cut. Some monarchs, particularly the deeply pious ones, kept to semi-monastic routines. Queen Melisende of Jerusalem was known to rise in the night for private devotions. St. Louis of France slept on straw and wore hair shirts. Even you, in your own way, follow a bedtime ritual shaped by spiritual anxiety. Prayers whispered through chapped lips. Relics tucked under pillows, saintly names muttered as protection against dreams that don't always feel like dreams. You pull your fur closer now, the weight of it oddly comforting. Somewhere out there, the monks are finishing their chants, lighting candles with trembling fingers, stepping back into their chill cells to catch a few more hours of sleep before the next bell tolls. You wonder what their dreams are like. Peaceful, visions, or just silence deep and black as the chapel floor. It's humbling, this contrast. You rule over lands they've renounced. You sleep on feather beds while they lie on straw, and yet they have something that eludes you. Stillness. That deep, quiet certainty that their suffering has meaning, that each cold night is a form of prayer, not a punishment. But let's not romanticize it too much. You've visited monasteries in winter. You've seen the chapped skin, The red-rimmed eyes, the shaking hands during Mass. Devotion doesn't make the cold go away, it just reframes it. You turn back onto your side, listening now to the silence between the walls. Your fire is out, your breath is fogging again, but you're strangely calm. The monks are awake, the prayers are being said, the bells have rung, the rhythm of life continues, even if you're not sleeping through it. And in some odd way, knowing they're out there, kneeling in frostbitten chapels, chanting into the void, helps you settle. Because in a medieval castle, in the coldest hours before dawn, sometimes faith sleeps where fire cannot. You wake to a sharp yelp and something warm and furry launching itself directly onto your chest. Not the usual human snoring next to you. This is smaller, lighter, slightly panicked, and very much alive. As your bleary eyes adjust, you realise it's a dog. Not your dog, not exactly anyway, but close enough. It's one of your court spaniels, terrified by a thunderclap or some ghost no one can see, and now thoroughly committed to sharing your pillow. You sigh, more amused than annoyed, and settle back as the dog circles, then collapses in a sigh of its own. Its body is a perfect heater, radiating warmth straight into your ribs. Honestly, you're not complaining, because in a world where the walls have ears and the windows have frost, sometimes the best thing you can sleep with is your pet. The idea of royal pets in bed sounds decadent now, even mildly inappropriate, but in the medieval world it was standard practice. Not because of sentimentality, although, sure, a little of that too, but because animals were functional, they provided warmth, they sniffed out danger, they kept the fleas on themselves instead of you, mostly. And in a world before electric blankets or heated floors, you needed all the living insulation you could get. Let's get historical. It was common for kings, queens, and nobles to sleep with lapdogs, cats, and sometimes even more exotic pets. Records show that Queen Elizabeth of York slept with small dogs tucked under the covers. French queens favoured toy some sort spaniels. Even popes, reportedly, kept cats near their sleeping quarters, not just for companionship but for mouse patrol. Which brings us to your current situation. Dog on your chest, possibly drooling, definitely warm. You glance over to the foot of the bed where your actual dog, a larger, dignified hound, has claimed an entire corner of the furs and is now glaring at the newcomer like a nobleman who just lost his seat at court. The little one doesn't care. She's asleep already, her breath puffing gently against your neck. You adjust your blanket, now bunched at the corners thanks to all the repositioning, and try not to laugh. Because this isn't rare. It's nightly. Between the humans and the animals, your bed sees more rotation than the royal council chamber. And let's be honest, the pets are usually less treacherous. Here's your quirky fact. Some royals had custom-made pet blankets, small pieces of cloth, often tall or fur-lined, embroidered or scented, designed specifically for the animal companions who shares their beds. Cats, especially in Eastern European courts, were sometimes given their own pillows. There are even records of dog collars made of velvet, adorned with bells, so a noble wouldn't accidentally roll over them in the night without warning. And this wasn't just a nighttime thing. Animals followed you into your chamber, waited near your chair during meetings, and sometimes even accompanied you during evening prayers. They were status symbols, sure, but also security blankets in fur. In the isolating, high-stakes world of royalty, where everyone wants something and few say what they mean, animals offered rare, uncomplicated affection. Of course, not all pets were lap-sized, and not all bedfellows were canine or feline. Some monarchs developed attachments to far stranger creatures, monkeys, falcons, even deer. There's an infamous case of a certain king keeping a domesticated badger in his personal quarters. That arrangement, predictably, did not last long, still the relationship was deep. Pets were mourned like family when they died, buried in royal gardens, named in wills. Some rulers even commissioned tiny suits of armour for their dogs. You haven't gone that far. Yet. Back in the bed, the little spaniel snuffles contentedly. The hound at your feet groans and shifts, trying to reclaim more blanket space. You're now pinned in place, a furry sandwich with exactly one corner of the coverlet left to yourself. And now for the scholarly debate. Did royal pets really share the bed, or is this exaggerated nostalgia? Some academics argue that paintings and poems romanticize the idea of the sleeping monarch flanked by loyal beasts. Others cite the meticulous inventories of royal households, which clearly list animal bedding, food bowls near the bed, and payment to servants assigned specifically to clean up after use of the animals in the chamber. In other words, yes, this happened, regularly, and it was considered normal. Of course, there were downsides. Animals brought fleas, tracked in mud and occasionally chewed on royal slippers, and once, memorably, vomited onto a visiting noble's pillow during a tense peace negotiation. That dog was exiled. The noble, regrettably, was not. But despite the mess and the snoring and the occasional nighttime accident, pets remained a fixture of royal sleep, because they were warm, they were loyal, and they didn't care if your court was plotting your downfall. They just wanted to curl up and nap. You close your eyes again, arms folded awkwardly around the small spaniel on your chest, feet pushed gently against the hound at your feet. It's not a perfect setup, but it's warmer now, quieter, softer, and somehow, despite the cold and the politics and the draft slipping in through the shutters again, you finally feel something close to peace. Because even when the whole castle feels like a conspiracy wrapped in stone, there's something honest about an animal's snore against your collarbone. You're half awake, not from a dream or a noise this time, but from pressure, deep, throbbing, unmistakable pressure in your back, in your legs, across your ribs. You shift, wince, and try to stretch, but the weight of your furs and your latest nighttime bedfellows, one dog, one human, and what may or may not be a rogue boot left in the sheets, make movement impossible. And then it hits you. You're pregnant. Again. In winter. In this castle. You sigh, more from resignation than distress, and let your head sink back into the pillow. Because if medieval winters were already brutal for kings and queens, being a pregnant queen during the coldest months, that's a particular circle of royal discomfort that deserves its own chapter in every history book. And spoiler alert, it's rarely a happy one. You place a hand over your stomach, still flat enough for plausible deniability at court, but already buzzing with the knowledge that something's growing. You can feel it. Your body shifting, preparing, protesting. Every joint aches. Your skin is dry, stretched, pulled tight from the cold. You'd kill for a bath, a real one, with hot water and rose petals. And nobody barging in to ask whether the Duke of Cumberland's horse has been fed yet. Here's your historical fact. Pregnancies in royal households were closely watched, especially during winter months when the mother's health was considered even more precarious. Cold weather meant less access to fresh food, fewer herbal remedies, and more difficulty keeping the mother warm and infection-free. Midwives were called early. Physicians hovered like vultures. Everyone in the palace began whispering the same word, air. And that's the real pressure, isn't it? You're not just carrying a child, you're carrying the future of the dynasty, the kingdom. The treaty between two unstable nations, the hopes of 1,000 people who expect you to deliver a boy in sons, in dignity, in a fur-lined room that doesn't smell like wet hay. No pressure. You try to turn over. Bad idea. Your hips protest, loud and clear. You settle for shifting your arm instead, pulling your nightrobe tighter across your chest. The air is cruel tonight. Somehow sharper than usual. And of course, you're not sleeping alone. You never are. But when you're pregnant, you're never really alone, even when you think you are. There's a second heartbeat in the room now, and it's coming from inside you. You can't help but worry. Every cramp, every wave of nausea, every strange tightening in your back, it all takes on a different weight. You remember the stories. Queens who miscarried in the 6th month after slipping on the frost near the chapel steps. Noble women who gave birth to still children because the chamber was too cold and the blankets too thin. You think of the queen before you, your aunt perhaps, whose baby was born too early one winter, barely breathed and never cried. Which brings us to a particularly unsettling, quirky fact. Some royal midwives used heated bricks and animal fat to warm the delivery bed during winter labour. Bricks would be baked in the fire, wrapped in wool and slid under the mattress, or sometimes placed under the mother's thighs, just to keep circulation from seizing up mid-birth. The fat smeared on exposed skin was meant to insulate. Cozy? No. That or you'd be surrounded by 10 sweating attendants frantically waving blankets near the fire to raise the room temperature while muttering prayers under their breath. Because in winter, every breath you take in labour is a gamble. The cold dries your throat, slows your heart, stiffens your muscles. Everything in your body is working harder than it should. And if the baby comes before dawn, that's when the cold is at its cruelest. There's an ongoing scholarly debate, one you probably won't lose sleep over tonight, but still, about how much climate influenced royal birth rates. Were there fewer conceptions in the dead of winter because of the discomfort? Did pregnancies begun in summer fare better overall? Did the royal household plan births around seasonal cycles? Or were you all just hoping the gods were in a good mood? Nobody really knows, but what is known is that royal winter births were dangerous. They carried higher mortality rates, for both child and mother. And yet here you are. And if your pregnancy becomes visible during the colder months, your life gets immediately more complicated. Your chambers are rearranged. Servants rotate in shifts. The fire must never go out. Hot stones are constantly brought to your bed. Your food is obsessively monitored. No cold meats, no undercooked eggs, no strong spices. Everything is warm, bland, nourishing, maddening. Even your dreams change. No more omens or court politics. Now you dream of drowning in wool blankets, of a cradle that won't stop rocking, of a child that won't stop crying even though you've never heard its voice. You wake in a cold sweat, unsure if it's fear or just the dog breathing too hard on your neck again. You try to calm yourself, you breathe slowly. You think of names, of the nursery they'll prepare, of the little gifts the court will offer when the birth is announced. Lace bonnets, carved wooden rattles, a brooch shaped like a lion, wrapped in silk and misplaced by a careless lady's maid within the first week. You think of holding something warm in your arms instead of just under your skin. And yet, you worry, because you've seen how quickly things go wrong. A fall, a fever, a delay in calling the midwife, a panicked servant who forgets to warm the birthing sheets. So much of your future depends on what happens inside this castle, in this room, in this very bed. You reach for a flask of warm water your attendant left on the bedside table. It's lukewarm now, but it helps. You press it against your belly and close your eyes. The wind moans against the shutters. Somewhere down the hall a door creaks. The baby kicks, soft but certain. You're cold, you're uncomfortable. You're carrying the future in a body that aches with each passing hour. But you're still here, wrapped in furs, breathing, waiting. Tonight you sleep with a kingdom inside you. By the time the sun drags its pale light across the high windows, you're already awake, stiff and dreading the moment your feet touch the floor. The fire's out again, of course it is, and your furs have slipped halfway off the bed. Somewhere someone is late bringing the morning embers, but you can't even summon the strength to yell about it. Your limbs feel heavy, your breath fogs in the air, and even the dog refuses to get up. But as you sit up and draw the curtain aside, you notice it. A fine layer of frost curling across the stone ledge just inside the room, and below your window, faintly visible through the glass. The castle courtyard is glowing white. Snow again, heavier this time. You can tell by the silence. And suddenly, it all makes sense. The sluggish servants, the frozen basin, the way the inside of your goblet is holding the new little glacier. Because when winter settles deep into a medieval castle, something strange and sinister begins to happen. The floors above freeze, the halls go quiet, and the dungeons below stay warm. You shuffle to the edge of the bed and look out, breath clouding the glass. Down in the courtyard, snow has piled up against the stone walls. The stable hands are moving slowly, hunched over, hurrying horses toward a shelter. But more interestingly, a thin curl of steam is rising from the base of the keep, from one of the openings near the bottom of the dungeon stairwell. And you're reminded with a tired laugh that once again, the warmest place in your entire castle is down in the dungeons. Let's get into it. Castles are big, right? Multi-storied, sprawling things built of thick stone blocks. But stone, for all its might, has a temperature personality roughly equivalent to a dead fish. It retains cold brilliantly, especially in upper chambers where wind slips in through every crack and settles like a sleeping beast. But deep below ground, the temperature stabilizes. The earth itself offers insulation, keeping the lower levels far warmer, relatively speaking, than your royal chambers ever managed to be. Here's your historical fact. Medieval dungeons weren't just for prisoners and torture. In many castles they doubled as food storage, wine cellars, and in winter months, sheltered spaces for servants or guards who didn't want to lose toes. Temperatures in deep castle basements often hovered several degrees warmer than the floors above, protected from wind and blanketed by the thick mass of earth and stone surrounding them. In other words, your least glamorous room is doing the best job at keeping people alive right now. You pull on your robe and shuffle toward the fire, which is nothing but ash. You'd give anything to spend a night in the wine cellar. Probably smells like old grapes and mould, but at least your breath wouldn't fog in the air. You sit back down on the edge of the bed and glare at the coals like they insulted your lineage. Here's your quirky fact. Some clever royals repurposed parts of the lower keep for winter lounging. Not full relocation, God forbid the nobility willingly descend into the realm of spiders and damp walls, but they'd sometimes move meals, meetings, or even musical gatherings to those lower chambers just to enjoy a few hours of consistent, blessed, non-murderous temperature. There are records of queens holding court in repurposed cellars, draped in tapestries, sipping mulled wine, surrounded by torches stuck directly into the stone walls. You're half tempted to do the same. Who needs grandeur when your joints ache from the cold and your upper chamber feels like a mausoleum that never got around to receiving a body? And it makes you wonder, why weren't royal bedrooms built below ground? Why put the most important person in the building in the highest, coldest, draftiest room of all? Scholars still debate it. Some say it was symbolism, higher rooms for higher status, closer to the heavens, further from the stench of kitchens and livestock. Others argue it was for safety. Elevated floors gave the monarch visibility, distance from potential invaders, and a long spiral staircase between themselves and anyone with bad intentions. But either way, the result is the same. You're freezing up here while the rats down in the dungeon are cozying up like it's a spa weekend. You glance at the floorboards, wondering how much of the warmth from below actually seeps upward. Not much, judging by the frost patterns near the window. The walls are too thick, the floors too uninsulated, and the design too focused on defense to care about comfort. In short, the dungeon wins. You start to imagine a night spent below, wrapped in blankets, beside a rack of dusty wine barrels, breathing air that smells of damp limestone instead of stale rushes and frozen dog breath. You could bring your furs, maybe a pillow, maybe even your diplomatic bed guest, if they promise not to complain. And for a moment the image is so vivid that you almost rise from the bed to make it happen. But then a servant enters, sheepish, or carrying the morning log for your hearth. He glances at the window. He knows, you both know, and so the day begins again. Another fire, another jug of water set by the coals to thaw, another round of reminders that your royal suite is beautiful, yes, but also an icebox with curtains. There's a strange poetry to it all. That below the grandeur, beneath the armour of your castle, the warmth hides. That the lowest place built to imprison and store has become the safest from the cold. And it makes you wonder how many other things in this life are like that. Eventually the fire catches. You pull your furs around your shoulders, and for a few minutes you feel a little less cursed, but part of you still imagines creeping down those steps tonight, slipping past the kitchen, past the guards, past the wine racks and barrels, to find a spot in the dungeon where your breath no longer fogs and your bones no longer ache. And if anyone dares to judge you, let them sleep in your bed for a night. It starts with a cough, dry, sharp from somewhere down the corridor. Not unusual, half the castle's coughing this time of year, but this one echoes oddly. It has that hollow tone, you know the one. It's the kind that creeps up from the throat like it's hiding something worse behind it. You're already halfway upright in bed before you even think about why. Because when a cough sounds like that in winter, in a castle full of bodies and close quarters, your instincts scream one thing louder than all the rest: plague. You don't say it out loud, of course, no one does, not at first. You glance toward your servant who's carefully poking the fire into something resembling life. She's tense too, she heard it. Everyone did. And just like that, the entire mood of the castle shifts. One cough becomes 3, then 7, and by the end of the day, the court physician is pale, the priest is mumbling more than usual, and servants are wearing sprigs of rosemary in their belts like talismans against death. You know what's coming, you've seen it before. This is what it's like to face plague season in a medieval castle, in the dead of winter. Now your chamber becomes more than just cold, it becomes a cage. Because here's the cruel trick of plague in winter. Everyone's already shut in together. Doors are closed, windows sealed, fires are burning low and slow. People huddle for warmth, share blankets, pass tankards of wine, kneel together in chapel. You might as well be locked in a crypt together, sharing air, skin and breath. Here's your historical fact. During the repeated waves of plague and pestilence in the medieval world, most famously the Black Death of the 14th century, castles were not spared. In fact, their tight quarters and large domestic staff often meant the disease moved quickly and efficiently. Royalty could try to quarantine themselves. But they still needed food, heat, servants, doctors. All it took was one infected kitchen boy or washerwoman for the whole royal wing to fall like dominoes. And so the rituals begin. The door to your chamber is now kept bolted from the inside. Only trusted servants may enter, and even they come in veiled, perfumed, with hands scrubbed raw. Your food is tasted, your bedding is changed with gloves. The bishop leaves holy water at the threshold. You're still cold, yes, but suddenly the cold is the least of your problems. The scary part isn't just the disease, it's the unknown. Who's sick? Who's hiding it? Did the cough from the stables reach the scullery? Did the scullery maid bring your breakfast tray? Did you already touch the goblet that touched her hand? The fear is thick. You can feel it in the way your chambermaid avoids your eyes, in the way the guard outside your room now wears a cloth over his mouth, in the way your body has started to ache even though, probably, you're not actually ill. Yet. You tell yourself it's just the draft, just the winter, just the weight of the world pressing on your chest like a sack of coal. Nothing more, right? Quirky fact of the night. Some monarchs during plague outbreaks went full panic mode and sealed themselves inside specially constructed clean rooms, temporary chambers lined with cloth soaked in vinegar or rosewater, with air filtered through herbal satchels and wax-sealed windows. These were not common, of course. Only the most wealthy Savrihor and paranoid could afford them. But when you're watching people around you drop like flies, paranoia starts to feel a lot like prudence. And yet, even with all this care, you're still at risk. Because disease doesn't care about crowns or cloaks. It slips through keyholes, it rides on breath, it dances between firewood and fingertips and settles in lungs whether you wear ermine or rags. The only difference is how loudly people cry when you die. And here's the haunting scholarly debate. Did castles protect royalty during plague, or trap them? Historians argue both sides. On one hand, castle walls kept out the infected masses. On the other, those same walls kept in the infection once it entered. The architecture wasn't made for isolation. It was made for defence, against arrows and siege engines, not microbes. There was no airflow design, no sanitation system worth bragging about. If someone coughed at the wrong end of the hall, the whole wing was a contagion zone by nightfall. You lie back now, furs pulled up to your chin, heart beating a little too fast. You've sent the dog out of the chamber. The diplomat who shared your bed 2 nights ago was suddenly taken ill this morning and is now confined to his own chambers with a priest hovering nearby. You've lit every candle, burned every piece of scented resin you could find. The smoke makes your eyes sting, but the scent is sharp, clean, alive. You cling to it like it might keep you safe. You think of past winters, the joy of snow, the annoyance of frozen ale, the ridiculous warmth of your dog curled across your feet. How simple those discomforts feel now, how stupidly manageable. You'd take them all back in a heartbeat. Trade every fur blanket for the certainty that the cough outside your door is nothing more than a cold wind. You begin to pray, not out loud, not formally, just a thought repeated. Let it pass, let it pass, let it pass. Outside the cough returns. This time closer. You breathe through your hung nose shallowly and pull the fur closer. You've survived so many winters, fought off frostbite, insomnia, frozen pillows and snow in your bed. But this is the winter that feels personal. The castle isn't just cold now, it's watching. And for the first time in years you wish your bed were just a little less warm and a lot more empty. The fire is crackling again. Not gently, not quietly, roaring. Someone must have gotten bold and thrown on a whole log instead of the usual pathetic bundle of damp kindling. You're not complaining. In fact, you're basking. It feels like a miracle. Like the hearth gods woke up from a 300-year nap and finally decided to give you a break. Your chamber is actually warm. You don't trust it. So you do what any sensible medieval monarch does when something seems too good to be true. You assume someone rich and powerful is behind it. And in this case, you'd be right. Because today isn't just a warm day, it's Tudor warm. This isn't some random act of weather kindness. It's the beginning of an architectural and technological revolution in royal comfort. It's the whisper of things to come, the slow, stubborn birth of early heating systems in palaces. Yes, the Tudors, famously full of drama, gluttony, beheadings, and surprisingly forward-thinking winter survival techniques. You walk across the chamber, no slippers required for once, and stop near the hearth. It's hotter than usual, more consistent. The air doesn't bite at your ankles. There are no mystery breezes swirling up from the floorboards. You don't feel like you're sleeping in the skeleton of a half-frozen cathedral. You feel okay, which in castle terms is downright luxurious. Let's get into the historical fact. During the late medieval period, particularly under the Tudors, wealthy castles and manors began upgrading their heating systems. This included bigger, more efficient fireplaces with brick-lined chimneys that actually drew smoke upward instead of letting it roll around your chamber like a suffocating blanket. Flues were improved. Chimney sweeps became a thing. And best of all, some royal residences even began installing primitive forms of central heating. Yes, you heard that right. Not vents and thermostats, obviously, but hypocaust systems borrowed from ancient Roman inspiration, where hot air was channeled through stone passages beneath floors and into the walls. Henry VIII himself had the rooms in Hampton Court modified to stay warmer year-round. Of course, it wasn't common yet, and it wasn't perfect. But compared to the icy coffin-like bedrooms of earlier monarchs, this was nothing short of sorcery. And you're one of the lucky ones. Your keep was upgraded last year. Very hush-hush-ish, very expensive. You can still hear the grumbling from your treasurer about the costs, but suddenly, the idea of spending a winter night without visible breath makes it all seem worth it. You sit down beside the hearth and rub your hands together, marvelling at how they don't hurt from the cold. Even your joints feel looser. The stones beneath you don't leech away your body heat like greedy little frost demons. You're almost annoyed you didn't demand this 10 years ago. Now time for your quirky fact. In addition to better fireplaces, wealthy nobles began commissioning custom fire screens, movable warmers, and even heated chairs. That's right, chairs, with compartments for hot coals underneath the seat. The goal wasn't just to heat a room, it was to heat your person directly and unapologetically. Some of these contraptions looked more like medieval torture devices than furniture. But hey, toasty is toasty. You pace a little, testing the corners of the room. The usual draft that seeps in from the arrow slit by your reading bench? Gone. The chill that rises from the floorboards near the wardrobe? Muted. Someone sealed the stone joints with moss and cloth. There are thick tapestries hung at every wall, not just the ones guests can see. The furniture is moved inward, toward the fire's range. It feels intentional. Cozy, even. You might survive this winter after all. This brings us to an open scholarly debate. Did the Tudor era mark the real turning point in royal winter comfort? Some historians argue yes, that this was the beginning of kings and queens finally prioritising livability over fortress aesthetics. Others suggest the upgrades were mostly for show, that a few warm chambers in a palace didn't change the general misery of castle life during the colder months. But the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Winter still sucked. But now it sucked slightly less if you had the power, money, and a willingness to spend it on firewood and fancy chimneys. You ring for a servant, ask for wine, and when it arrives, not frozen, you smile to yourself. This is the kind of indulgence that makes life bearable. Even the goblet feels less icy in your hands. You sip it slowly, letting the warmth settle in your belly. The logs crack. The flames flicker against the tapestries. You can feel your skin actually relaxing, like it doesn't need to be on the defensive anymore. The chamber door opens and in comes one of your advisors, already overdressed for the temperature. They pause mid-sentence when they feel the heat. "Much improved, Your Majesty," they murmur, fanning themselves slightly. You raise an eyebrow. Improved? This is a revelation. This is winter without despair. Still you nod like it's no big deal, like you haven't spent the last decade bargaining with saints just for one night of sleep that didn't involve waking up with frost on your pillow. Later you stretch out in bed and for the first time in months, you do not feel like a body about to be pickled by the cold. You feel normal. Your nose isn't numb, your fingers aren't clenched. There are no curls of frost on the ceiling above your head. You can't remember the last time the air inside your own bedroom felt forgiving. You close your eyes. The fire hisses softly beside you. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughs, a rare sound in winter. You let yourself enjoy it. Because this moment is fragile. The storm might return tomorrow. The wind might sneak back through a crack no one noticed. The pipes might freeze. The wood might run low. The servants might forget the protocol. But tonight, the Tudors did you a favour. Tonight, the chamber feels like a place a person could actually live, or at the very least sleep. You wake up, warm, not lukewarm, not, I can sort of feel my toes, not, the dog is sleeping on my chest again, properly, blissfully warm. For a moment, you don't even open your eyes, you just lie there, soaking it in like a monarch in a fever dream. No frost on your nose, no icy draught tunnelling under the covers, no dull ache in your lower back from shivering in your sleep. You feel like a croissant left too long in an oven, flaky, fragile, and somehow golden. Of course, your brain ruins it immediately by whispering, "This must be what dying feels like." You crack open one eye just to check. Still here, still in your chamber. The fireplace is still glowing. Someone must have remembered to stoke it during the night. The window's frosted, yes, but not from the inside. The chamber pot hasn't frozen solid. Even your breath as you exhale doesn't fog in the air like some doomed spirit escaping your lungs. Unbelievable. You have, against all odds, survived another medieval winter night in your own bed. But would anyone else have? That's the real question. Because what you've endured, in layer upon layer of furs, under a carved wooden canopy, with servants and warm bricks and chambermaids armed with hot pans, it wasn't just about survival. It was about privilege, power, resources. Most people in your kingdom don't sleep in heated towers or swaddle themselves in ermine when the wind changes direction. Most peasants live in homes where the only insulation is whatever mud hasn't crumbled from the walls, and the family shares a straw mattress with the chickens for warmth. One fire, no glass windows, no dog-sized foot heaters. You? You have 20 blankets. You have candles made from beeswax instead of animal tallow. You have dried lavender in your pillow, and someone who warms your boots before they touch your royal feet. And even you barely made it through the season without cracking a tooth from the cold or screaming at a wall at 3 a.m. It puts things in perspective. Here's your historical fact. By the late Middle Ages, many royal residences were equipped with resources and staff purely for managing winter discomfort. Dedicated teams for maintaining fires, special fabrics ordered months in advance, woodcutters who did nothing but gather fuel for the Queen's chambers. And yet even with this sprawling infrastructure, medieval winters still made people miserable. Rich, poor, powerful, forgotten, everyone suffered. Some just did it with nicer bedding. Now, time for the quirky reality check. There are actual records, serious, meticulous inventories, listing the number of geese required just for feather refills of royal beds. Geese, whole flocks. And still, you had nights where you could have sworn you were sleeping on a slab of cursed stone carved by a ghost with arthritis. Even the concept of sleep back then wasn't what you'd imagine. You didn't sleep through the night. You woke up halfway, prayed, maybe got a snack, talked to your spouse if they were awake, or stared into the darkness until your brain tired itself out again. Some even referred to it as first sleep and second sleep, and between the two, all kinds of thoughts crept in. Doubts, nightmares, drafts, political regrets. And so, here's the scholarly debate. Would modern people even survive a medieval winter night? There are arguments. Of course, one camp says yes. We're adaptable creatures, we'd pile on layers, cuddle up, get used to the dark. Another camp laughs maniacally and simply says, one night without Wi-Fi and you'd be crying into a frozen pillow. And honestly, they're not wrong. You get up now gingerly and walk across the chamber. The floor isn't warm, but it's not biting either. You pass your hand near the fire, still glowing. The water in your basin, liquid. That's a win. You splash your face and it doesn't hurt. That's 2 wins. Maybe this is what victory feels like in winter. Not glory, not triumph. Just a room that doesn't actively hate you. You glance out the window. The snow is melting. The sky is grey, but the light has softened. There's birdsong, faint and hesitant. Spring is tiptoeing toward you with wet shoes and muddy hems, but it's coming. And with that, the spell breaks. You survived. Not heroically, not gracefully. There were curses. There were sleepless nights. There were possibly moments when you accused the firewood of personal betrayal. But here you are, alive, upright, breathing, your nose intact, your feet still attached. You've made it through snowflakes on your pillow, haunted corridors of cold air, medicinal cheese at 3 a.m., and at least one diplomatic sleepover you never wish to repeat. You've seen frost form on tapestries, heard mice nesting in your bed frame, and had conversations with God, saints, and occasionally your dog, all while wrapped in so many layers you could barely move your arms. And now it's over, or almost. So tonight, before you climb into bed, your wonderfully unusually warm bed, you pause, just for a moment. You run your fingers along the carved frame. You fluff the feather pillows. You thank the fire. And maybe, just maybe, you whisper something into the silence. A prayer, a complaint, a promise that next year you're spending the winter in Provence. But for now, you pull the curtains closed, you slip beneath the furs, and for the first time in what feels like an entire century, you sleep. The castle is still now. Ditto, the snow has stopped. The fires are low, and outside the wind has quieted to a distant hush, just the soft, irregular breath of a season coming to its close. You're warm. Not extravagantly so, not tropically so, just the kind of warm that makes your joints forget to ache and your chest rise and fall without effort. The kind of warm that, in this place and time, feels nothing short of miraculous. And you can finally sleep not because you're tired, though you are, but because there's nothing left to endure tonight. No embers to coax back to life, no furs to rearrange for maximum survival, no nightcaps sliding sideways over your eyes, no dogs pacing the floorboards, no frost creeping in under the shutters, just peace. Real, earned, slightly smoky peace. You made it. You survived the coldest months in a fortress of stone. You learned to sleep like royalty, shivering layered, twitching at every draught, and whispering ancient prayers into fur-lined pillows. You endured lice, plague rumours, diplomatic snorers, and that one very suspiciously wet egg that someone insisted was perfectly fine. You've eaten cheese at ungodly hours, shared your bed with half the nobility and all of the pets, and woken up more times than you care to count to find snowflakes inside your room, and yet, you're here. The room is dark now, not ominous, just quiet. You shift once beneath the weight of history, and it settles around you like an old quilt stitched by centuries of survivors just like you. The castle, as always, is watching, but tonight it's not judging. It's not testing you. It's just breathing with you. Calm, still, cold at the edges, but not unkind. So go ahead, sink into the mattress. Let the aches fade. Let the fire crackle its final lullaby, and the stone walls hold you like a cradle instead of a cage. The kingdom can wait until morning. You've earned this sleep. And even if winter comes again, and it will, you'll know just how to survive it, like the kings and queens who came before you. One heavy blanket, one suspicious goblet of wine, and one very, very determined nap.